I believe we have a small video by them, and I'm going to attempt to play it here, and we'll see what we get.
ViewSecure Edge is an all-in-one platform to secure OT networks, connect remote users to OT and OT to the cloud, and deploy Edge applications easily. It's deployed in over 650 buildings worldwide, and with ISO, SOC 2 compliance, and more, it is verified secure. Secure Edge is like a moat for OT. Let's start with an IT and OT parable. Information Town is modern, with multi-layered security. This sets the standard for Operations Town, where legacy technologies leave it vulnerable to threats of ransomware attacks. Over time, teams in OT have opened various gates to access different interconnected systems. With one stolen password, a bad actor can breach this legacy security approach and find a vulnerable system to take for ransom. And with multiple points of entry, all interconnected systems risk attack with the breach of the weakest access point. How can Operations Town have a single, unbreachable entry point? With a moat or secure edge built around it preventing multiple entrances. With multi-factor security creating zero trust protection for all systems, Secure Edge is what IT is looking for. Guest identity verification requires an authenticated user with MFA and a timed security key uniquely authorized only for access to a specific OT resource. Once inside, the Secure Edge acts as an escort, monitoring guest activity and collecting the security key when they are escorted out upon completion. With its Secure Edge in place, Operations Town now receives a seal of approval from IT. Operations Town can now focus on modernization. In fact, the Secure Edge is a gateway to all kinds of innovation, but that's a different story you should ask us about. Let's look at the architecture of ViewSecure Edge and how it creates your moat. It starts with a simple and secure interface to the IT network. You install the hardened iNode appliance plus OS without having to remove anything else. With secure boot, full disk encryption, and default deny for zero trust, IT will love the Secure Edge. Even better, it's not a PC. All of the configuration and control is via a secure portal through two-way authenticated tunnels. No web browsing or email downloads. Two-way authenticated tunnels also enable secure data movement to customer and vendor clouds. Secure Edge provides role-based, agentless remote access for vendors, only to OT they are authorized for, and using SSO and MFA that IT will applaud. Plus, everything is logged and traceable. Finally, this is also a secure, fully managed Docker runtime environment for one-click deployment of applications from our customizable marketplace. ViewSecure Edge is an easy-to-install, all-in-one platform that starts a building portfolio on a secure and innovative journey to the cloud with a clear ROI. Secure buildings. Cloud connected. Intelligent Edge. ViewSecure Edge. Proud to be a Cochrane Supply partner.
Cool. All right, thank you to View again for that. That was for lunch. They were the generous donors of that. Okay, so now starts the proper presentation. Like I said, I'm Mike Mitchell. I'm the CTO for Cochrane Supply. I've been with them for 23 years. Kind of came from the IT industry. I used to work, in the 90s in a raised floor server room and working with old Prime mainframes and that kind of thing. Did some of the first client server implementations at the place I was at. And right around 2001, I started working with Cochrane, and I'd done a little consulting with them, and then they said, "Hey, Mike, why don't you come on board? We got this new software called Tritium. We really, think you'd like it, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "What the heck?" Did it, and here I am 23 years later, and how many integrations and helping integrators and doing all, you name it. So, that's me. Today, we're going to talk about three different kind of sessions. We're going to talk about Tech XR. That's a software that we've developed at Cochrane Supply, and it uses the HoloLens 2 from Microsoft, and we're going to do some live demo with it and show you guys some stuff. Hopefully everything works, but we'll see. And then we've got a couple other presentations afterwards. I think we're going to have James do a accelerated engineering session, show you a lot of really great stuff about templates, some of the other more modern conveniences in Niagara to make your jobs go easier. And then I think we're going to have a little break. And then James is once again going to present on some HTML visualization. He's back there, so waving. Anyway, so that's what we got on deck. I'll switch over to my presentation now. Okay, and without further ado, so TechXR, it basically deals with augmented reality. This device is a Microsoft device, and it gives you this power, the ability to see digital information overlaid on the physical world. So anything from 3D models, BIM information, giant chiller plants, piping, you name it. And we've done a few things to add to that too and bind it up with Niagara. And there's a couple other things from Microsoft that also add to it too that we're going to be going over. All right, so that's the HoloLens 2. Here, put it on. It's a Windows 11 device, so it runs Windows 11 holographic. It's a little bit of a subset of Windows 11, but it basically gives you all the power that Windows 11 gives you too. It's a Microsoft operating system, so you can manage it with enterprise controls from MS 365, all that kind of stuff. So enterprise class customers usually like it. Cool. Let's see. And some of the development platforms that are usable on this and that we've used on it were Unity. We used the Unity software. It's kind of a gaming platform software, but it deals really well in 3D realm. And you can use that as a great platform to develop apps on. We did. Other things, like 3D Studio, Blender, anything that can get a 3D model, Revit, all that stuff. You can pull all those things out and be able to display them through this. And that key difference, one of the things that you can do, instead of wearing like an Oculus or the new Apple device where it kind of covers all of your vision, this is just like wearing sunglasses. So it's real easy to see you guys, and I'm not falling over myself, and in 20 minutes I'm not going to puke because I wore this stuff. So, the advantages. So it gives you that ability to visualize building control data. So when you need to see live data and information about your system and you want to be hands-free, say you're a technician and you're working on something, or you're in a data center and you want to walk up and down the aisles and see information about each server rack or anything like that, you can display it. BIM's information, 3D models, like I said, all that stuff can be pulled into it. And we all do it via Niagara, so it's pretty nice. And also has the ability to remotely communicate. So you can do essentially a Teams meeting, and I'll cover that a little bit in a second, with remote people. So if you've got somebody at a site that, I've got a really tough question about this particular valve in the actuator, it's not doing what I expected to do, let me call my expert. You start up an app, and you call that expert, and he can see through your eyes at what you're looking at, and actually even superimpose arrows, lines, circle things in front of you, and it'll appear right in front of your eyes, open up PDFs for you, all that kind of stuff. It's pretty cool. And we're actually going to leverage that too today for a little bit of a live demo, and that's Abe Monreal. He's from the Dallas office, and he's going to help me today and demonstrate stuff. So let's see. This is handy too. Creating impactful education and training. So there's all sorts of things that you can do with this in terms of documenting your buildings or documenting your systems or certain control panels, or hey, the old guy knows we wired this panel differently than all the other ones. Let's document that and put it on that panel itself, so a new guy walking up to it will know that information right away. Or the new guy who doesn't know anything about this particular building, he can walk up, look at a QR code, get all sorts of information presented to him about that building. And just training itself too. Say you had a panel that you needed to build in a certain way, and you're going to crank out 100 of them. And you can build one guide that shows you how to wire that panel up, and then put the newbie on the wiring the panel, and he can go through and step through the guide, and it steps him through the wiring. That kind of thing. And that being said, for those two things, remote assist is the software that Microsoft makes. It's an app that pretty much comes with this. You got to do it like a monthly license to keep it going on it, but I think it's about $60. Not too bad. And that gives you the remote Teams meetings ability. Guides, it's Dynamics 365 Guides is the proper name of it, and that's about the same price per month. But that's the one that you can use to author different walkthroughs and step-throughs or information about your building, and then that's all visible in the HoloLens. Okay, and then we made our app too. And our app, it'll talk to a Niagara station, and you can pull up data models and 3D models and panels of information, and also have hyperlink shortcuts on it too if you need to bring up a PDF or a link to another system. So say you've got a maintenance management system or something like that, technician can walk up to the air handlers and look at a QR code, get all the information live about it. He's got to do some service on it. You can open up the guide that tells him how to perform that service, and then last but not least, he opens up the internet shortcut that takes him to the maintenance software where you can record, hey, I did this and at this time and all that kind of stuff. So, it's pretty cool. All right, a little bit of a further deep dive into some of these. That remote assist like I was talking about. HoloLens 2 has been around for a couple years now, 2-3 years. They had a first version of it, a HoloLens 1. It was a little less horsepower to it and a little less oomph. This one's got a lot more oomph to it, and it has the ability to display better 3D models and run a little bit more robust apps, and that's one of them. So it's essentially, guys, it's a Teams meeting. You're just calling somebody, you're starting up that app, you call somebody, whoever that is. There can be more than one person in the Teams meeting, and they can all digest the information that you're trying to go over. And you can start other apps too while you're in that Teams meeting as well. All right, so that's remote assist. Guides, like I was saying, it's pretty neat. It starts off with a Microsoft app on your laptop where you kind of put together a series of steps, and you can do like different tasks, they call them, and then steps to those tasks, and then you can add video clips, PDF files, just straight images, and 3D objects to it as well. So you author it there first on your laptop, then you start up the HoloLens app for guides, and it also anchors to a QR code. So you might have a QR code sitting on a control panel somewhere. You look at that, and you then are able to see all that information that you laid out in that initial outline, and you author it first, so somebody with those privileges comes in and walks through each step and then positions all the 3D objects, positions the videos, all that stuff, so that it's easy to use for the user. And then the operator comes in afterwards and he's able to use the app, and it just walks them through stuff. It's also great. We're using it in a couple, we've done a lot of different things with it. Between documenting a building, if you've got a lot of information, that the old guys in the building know all the stuff about that building, we installed this one weird and this relay is kind of screwed up and blah, 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 or whatever. You can put that into those guides and all those custom information, and then it's stored. And then the next person down the line using it can just walk up to the building and say, here's, what system do I want to learn about? This. So it's nice. The other two things that we're working with too, flame safeguard testers. So at our branch offices, especially up north, we've got a lot more of those. You can put your boiler controller on a tester, and if it's having issues, you can walk through a series of steps and it tests out the controller for you. Well, some of our branch people are new and they're like, I don't know how to do this, and we've had old pieces of paper and stuff like that laying around where they have to kind of read this and figure out what they're doing. We got rid of that, and now we've got a guide made so they can just look at a QR code and it steps them through, here's how you test the flame safeguard controller. Also, we're working with Yaskawa, and they've got, like a drive startup or anything like that. We're building a guide for them as well. We're working with our local rep up there in Detroit. So, lots of cool stuff. And then, here's our app, that Tech XR. It's pretty cool. It's a combination of two things. There's a HoloLens app that we wrote in Unity, and that reaches out and talks to whatever station that you guys want it to talk to. So if you've got 10,000 supervisors, whatever it is, you build that in, and it can talk to those. In the supervisor or J station itself, there's a service that runs, and that is used to basically define the data that you want to be able to see in here. Let's see, do I talk about that yet? Yeah. Well, I'm going to talk about it anyways. You basically define data models, and it's basically, okay, what's a VAV? What kind of points define a VAV? And you can find those points either by tags or names or BQL or equal queries, essentially is how we build that. Tried to make it pretty flexible. So you define that data model, and then you define a dynamic group, and that dynamic group is a group of 3D models and data panels and hyperlinks and the things that you want to show when somebody looks at a QR code that's tied to that particular device. So you build that in the service, and then you implement a couple objects in your devices, like if you got 80 VAVs, you put a couple objects in those, and then each one of those has a particular QR code tagged to it by handle. And that's what we've got sitting up here right now. It's really basic too. There's nothing too cybersecurity wise. You're not going to be able to get to anything with this. It's basically just a text QR. It has the name of the station, colon, the handle of the object, pipe, and then the name of the station and whatever dynamic group you wanted to use to view it. Because we knew that, like, if you're looking at, say, a chilled water system, there might be 3 or 4 different types of views you want to see. You could have one where it's a remote guy and he sees the whole entire chillers and the towers and the pumps and everything involved in it, and live, life size, and all the data panels around that shows him what the system's doing. You might have a guy on site that doesn't want all the 3D modeling, he just wants the data panels. So you build another group for that. You could have another guy that just wants to see it small. Just give me it all right here in front of me and I can really visualize it and see what's going on. And you could build one for that. So that's what the intent of those are. And then we also got, you can build, I mentioned here, different hyperlinks that you can build on each data panel. And it's essentially, it opens up a web browser. Right now, in the version that we have, it'll open up Edge, because this is a Microsoft device. And it'll open up that Edge browser and you can visualize whatever you want. Either stuff back on the Niagara station, so if you want to embed PDFs, or even the Niagara pages themselves and do some control work from that, you can do that. Or stuff on the internet, as long as it's got connectivity. All right, so we'll try it. Okay, so here we go, guys. This is like I said, it's a Microsoft device, so I'm gonna power it up. And there's a bunch of different ways to log into it. But as it's Microsoft, it can do like a PIN. You can actually enter in a password and it'll show you a keyboard in front of you, or you can do iris recognition, which I did, and it just saw my eyeballs, knew it was me, and I'm logged in. And I'm going to hand that off to the gracious assistant, Abe. And he's going to put that on. And what he's going to do, he's going to start up that remote assist app. So that's going to essentially bring up Teams. He's going to be able to call himself. That's my account that he's logged in with. So he's going to call his laptop over there. We got the laptop plugged into HDMI. So he's going to call himself and then answer it on his laptop, and then you guys will be able to see what he's seeing. And then once we do that, and okay, got that working, he's going to start up the Tech XR app, and then he'll be able to look at these QR codes and pull up information about them and the stuff that we have running. Yeah, so the station that we're talking to, because we're doing this as a demo here, so we're trying to figure out, okay, do we want to use like a TOSI box and some Wi-Fi access, or are we going to do something in the cloud or whatever? And this is just basically a cloud supervisor. The protocol it uses works over 443, and it is secure. It's basically a servlet. And the stuff that we chose to show out of the station, we've got a single heat pump here on this one, and that should just show basically a heat pump 3D object and one data panel, real simple. This one is actually a little more complicated. It's going to be a floor plan, a couple of heat pumps in the floor plan, data panels pointing to where the stats are, and the floor plan we actually made from Matterport. So, a Matterport is I don't know if you guys stay in an Airbnb or a VRBO, and you're shopping around for them. Some of them have that little walkthrough where you can walk through the house, or even real estate and stuff like that, where you're walking through the house and seeing stuff. Hey, Abe's up. Thanks, Joseph, for maximizing it. All right. Cool. So, Abe has called himself. And that's what you're seeing here. That's Teams running on his laptop. You'll also notice, I probably can't see it real well, but there's a bar at the top of it where it says Start Editing. So if you're the remote guy working on the laptop, that's where you can hit the controls to superimpose an arrow or circle things or bring up different documents to bring up, and it'll pop up right in front of them. So now, I believe, he's going to start up our Tech XR app. And you can see what he's doing here. When you turn, it fully visualizes and articulates your hands in front of you too. It sees every joint, everything in it. And we kind of left that visualization too in the app because it's just cool. And so when you're looking at your hand palm this way, you can touch that window symbol that pops up, and that brings up the Windows menu, just like regular Windows 11 kind of stuff. And then you can start apps. So this is firing up. And while he's doing that, the Matterport stuff, so it's a Matterport that creates those other 3D models that you see in like those Airbnbs, et cetera. It's basically a device that has LiDAR on it and a camera, and you take it around and you move it about 6 to 8 feet every time throughout a room. So if we were scanning this room, it'd take about, 100 points that you step through the room, you got an app on your phone, you tell it to do a scan, you get out of the way so you're not in the picture. It rotates around on its own and scans that place. Cool. Hey Abe, do me a favor. Just hold out one hand in front of your eyes and turn your hand around on that. So you can kind of see how it maps his hand. You can see every joint is articulated in it too. So you can, wiggle your fingers. See how it sees all that stuff? So you can actually program against that too if you wanted to. So if there's particular things that you needed to do, you can have it do it on a gesture. Oh, and you can also see when he looks at his palm, we actually built some menuing into that as well, and you can see a bunch of buttons there on the sides. There's a bunch of things that we do with that. He was bringing up some debug panels that we have, so that it'll show the loading of the models. That model cache is one of the debug panels, so that when it's loading a 3D model, pulling it from the station and embedding it here on the HoloLens, it'll show that. And some models load faster than others. Matterport scans are really intense usually because they've got a lot of textures to them. Like, for example, if we were doing this room, it'd be about 200 scans, and that's 200 individual JPEGs that you got to download from the thing, and then it kind of transforms them so it can crunch them and use it. But Revit models and things like that, they're a lot simpler. Even though if there's a lot of polygons to them in that, it displays them pretty well. All right, without further ado, so that was a heat pump, a floor plan, a small air handler, and a life-size air handler. We'll go in order. Okay. Sure, we'll give it a shot. So lighting can affect this as well, so you gotta get fairly close to it. You'll see when it pops on them, you might have to do the reset QRs too, Abe. Oh, nope, it went. So you see it recognize the QR code. You saw that little box pop up. It's loading up a model, and there it is. Oh, yep, it did it already. He was looking at the debug thing, but there's the stuff that it popped up. So it's basically a data panel full of points that we've described to describe a heat pump. We've got a few hyperlinks on the side of it, and then that's that heat pump model. And I think we made that still adjustable. So if you want to grab the heat pump and move it around a bit. So you can see that when you're executing this and doing it in an actual job site, say you've got 1,000 VAVs that you're doing, and not every VAV that is going to have a QR code next to it. Some might have a column next to that QR code or the stat, and some might have this or that. So you've got to be able to move these things around and customize them, and that's how you do it. Oh yeah, and you can resize them. If you grab it with two, it's kind of like doing your fingers apart on a phone when you're zooming into something. Same thing there. Cool. Okay, so that's the real basic one. Abe, if you want to clear that, and then try the floor plan. So that's a button on there. It just basically resets the QRs. This one is a lot bigger. This is a Matterport scan. So this is going to load up some data panels. You see the arrows loaded in really quick. You don't see the floor plan yet because it's a monster model. And you can see Abe going over there. You can see all those textures loading in one at a time. There's 111 individual scans on that particular model. So that's what it's going through right now. And this floor plan happens to be a building. It's in a building in downtown Detroit. It's the 3rd floor of a particular building, and it's the house of the Urban Tech Exchange. It's basically like a little science lab for a bunch of different companies that work together to pool in and explore advanced technologies like this kind of stuff. Cisco, Bedrock, oh boy, Next Energy, couple others. Yeah, you'll actually see it on the sign in the floor plan in a minute.
Code Labs.
Code Labs, of course. Yep. Okay, I think it's about to load. Any second now. There it is. So that's what that floor plan looks like, and Abe, just have fun with it. So he's kneeling down. We made the whole 3rd floor only about this big in front of you, so that's one style of looking at a floor plan. And you can see that's a Matterport scan. So it's got every single texture for that Matterport device detected, it displays. So you can see the little tables in there, everything, stat locations, it's all going to be very accurate. And it actually, when you do a Matterport scan as well, it's so accurate. One of the other downloads that you can get from them when you do one of these is an actual 2D floor plan that's to the 1/4 inch. So it's pretty cool. And again, you can resize these as well. We happen to do that one just this big, but you could have that floor plan life size, and it's like you're walking through the entire 3rd floor of that building if you needed to. If somebody needed to be familiar with a particular mechanical room or something like that. We've got one guy that is doing a bunch of Army Reserve bases, and he's already done Matterport scans of their mechanical rooms, and they're going to be using that. Cool. Alrighty, and then, so this one is a little air handler. Let's see if that pops in. Did it get it? Okay, great. So, and this one's just, I think we were working with U of D Mercy on this one. University of Detroit Mercy. They've got it's all Niagara in their entire campus, and one of the things that they had was I think a train built up air handler inside a building, and that's a little representation of it. And we added a couple sensors. Some of them are life-size because we were screwing around with it and having fun. But you see outdoor air sensors, some of the duct static pressure stuff and whatnot. See if you can get close to that small, oh yeah, Abe's moving the outdoor air sensor. And again, we made it so that you can move these objects around and kind of author it, and like if it's a life-size thing, you can put sensors where they actually go. If you've got a duct static sensor that's typically 2/3 down the duct, well, where is that exactly? Do I have to sit there and go up through 8 different ceiling tiles to get at this thing? Well, no, you can just look at it and see right where it is. And live data about it. Cool. Yep, and then there's that little 3D representation. I actually started that one with a Revit model. Revit, a lot of the manufacturers will give you good Revit models of all their devices and or equipment. Belimo's really good at it. Honeywell was also offered up a lot of good stuff. I've got some Belimo valves that are just perfecto. But for this one in particular, Train gave me the Revit model for it, but it was essentially a shell. Because a lot of times when you're just designing in a system like that, you just want to see, okay, how big is this thing, and how big is it going to be on my roof or in my room or what have you. And I basically designed all the other stuff that's on the inside of that.
Correct.
Yeah. Cool. So, and again, those are all data panels, and it's pulling information from a Niagara station that we have right now. It's just running in the cloud for our intents and purposes. But it's a representation of what we actually have on site. Okay, and Abe, if you do the full-size air handler. So this is essentially the same air handler, just a different view on it. And this is something that you could do on site or not. And it should spawn some stuff over here. And with this one, we've actually added some of the ductwork as well. So same kind of thing, similar panels, similar information grouped however you want them. You can kind of see, you'll see a system panel there, a set points panel, duct static sensor. We usually put some smaller panels out by where the sensors actually are. Depends on what you want to do. You can have it all clumped together in one big panel, whatever floats your boat. And yeah, so that's an actual air handler sitting here. One thing I'll say too, when, this looks pretty cool on the video, but when you actually have this thing on, it takes it up a notch. So I invite all you guys, come on over to the booth and try it out. And we've got all these QR codes. We got a couple other things too. Some neat stuff we're doing with Tim Scott. Tim Scott of Ford Land. Yep, Ford's doing a proof of concept with us, and we're working on their Ford Experience Center, I believe is the building's called. Really gorgeous building in Detroit. And we picked out a few systems with them that we're going to flesh out. We did the chilled water system, their hot water system, picked one air handler, one section of floor plan, and the associated VAVs with that air handler. So with that,
You gonna do lights too, maybe?
we can. Yeah, why not? Throw it in. The more the merrier, right? Yeah. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward and easy to deploy too on the Niagara side. If I get time in this, I'll actually show you guys a little bit under the hood. If we don't get time, I might just postpone it to the end because I know we went about 20 minutes over with the other meetings. So maybe we'll steal a little from Stump the Chump and show some of that, but we'll see. But I got 2 more slides too, Joseph, I'll show, and then we'll be good with that. Sure. Yeah, I guess so. Why not? You guys get the gist. All right, so again, the under the hood part, the HoloLens 2 app itself, everything anchors off of these QR codes. So it's kind of like its link, the augmented reality link to actual reality, physical stuff. So when you move an object, when he was moving like the outdoor air sensor and that, it's an actual offset in XYZ from this QR code. So it'll go 1 meter over, 1 meter out, 1 meter up, or whatever it happens to be. So it stores that information back in the JACE. So the next person looking at it sees it where you left it. That being said, our first version of it too, we didn't have locks on things. So yeah, you can imagine. I was on stage showing some stuff, and you'd have that air handler laid out nicely on the thing, and then I just do this with my hand, and it sees it, and it thinks you grabbed it, and the air handler is now sitting on the ceiling. So not good. So we included now lock buttons on all those objects and all the data panels. So once you put them somewhere, you kind of lock them in place, and you're good. And you can also do that lock through the Niagara system as well, because it's storing all that information back there. You can even do custom adjustments in the Niagara app too, as well as for positioning or that. So you can just do it one way and all those things inherit it. If you got 1,000 VAVs, you want them all just a data panel right in front of it, you can do that. Or any exceptions that you make, when you move one little object in that, it writes it to that specific VAV. So you've got options with that. Smash it on all of them or just do it on a couple. Anyways, back to this. We also have, there's a service that runs in the Niagara station, and with that service, everything that you create in there and all those particular devices, it'll create a QR code for, and we've got a view on the service where you could say you want to print all these things out on stickers and put them somewhere, you can do that. People can even just bring up that sticker. You can put the QR code like in the graphic for the VAV or in something else, and then you can look at it on your phone with the HoloLens and it'll pop up from there. Lots of options with that. All right, cool. Yeah. And then the Niagara 4 module. So again, I was going to dive into some of this too, and I still can, but I think in the sake of brevity, I got about 2 minutes left. So I'll just kind of talk about it a little bit, maybe show you a couple of things. And then later on, if we want to look at more, we can. Okay, 2 basic concepts with that I mentioned earlier, data models and then dynamic groups. The data model is just, it lives in the service itself. So you define, okay, here's what a chilled water system is going to have. And then you add points to that data model that says, okay, here's my chilled water supply temp. And how do you define it? You can either do it by tags, like haystack tags, or you can do it by names, and name equals whatever you have your chilled water supply temp named. So you do that first, and then you create a dynamic group in the service as well. You can kind of see it here. I don't know if it's very big, but you add this one. You can kind of see a floor plan. Heck, I'll just show you guys. So let's see. Oh, you know what? I think I got to open the browser. Yeah, cool. All right, so this is that station that's running in the cloud right now, and then here's the. Like I said, this is a view on the service itself. So there's models and dynamic groups. Hopefully that's big enough. Oh, there you go. And then within each one of these, like for example, we'll take that heat pump, that small little one that we had up here. Here's the data model for it. So here's the point slots that we defined. So it's got these different points in it. And if you look at one of these, it's just looking for 2 tags, a TechXR equip tag and a TechXR enable tag. And we just used a custom dictionary, TechXR. You can use anything. But what doing that will do is when you put the objects in the actual heat pump, it'll scan everything from that point down and look for anything that matches this. And that little single on the end basically guarantees you're just going to get one result. So that's the data model and what that kind of looks like. And then under dynamic groups, that heat pump dynamic group we made, it's got a couple object definitions. It says, okay, what data model do you want to use for this dynamic group? And that's why this says heat pump. It's the same as that data model. And then inside that, you say what 3D models do you want, and then what panels do you want? And the 3D model we used is this particular file. That's contained in the file system of the supervisor. There's a little folder here called TechXR models. And you can look down here, and there's a H2N4 UTX heat pump somewhere. Yep, there she is. So it's a zip file right now. It's actually and this might get a little technical, but hey, what the heck. So 3D models come in all sorts of different particular formats. And this one is an OBJ format. That's the one that we chose to use at first because that kind of worked well with Matterport. You can get an extraction of that from like 3D Studio or Blender pretty easy. And it just works. It's really, the zip file itself, well, this will be a good question. Nah. See if I can show you one of these. And the zip file itself basically has a .obj file in it, which is all the objects, and then I'll just talk about it. And then a series of JPEGs or PNGs, you can, whatever it decides to use, and then a material file, a .mat file, and that's the thing that kind of links, here's these 3D objects, here's all these textures that I have in the JPEGs, here's how to map them to those objects. So, works pretty good. Like I said, Revit models and things like that are usually pretty small and they load in a jiffy, like from 2 seconds to 5 seconds tops. The HoloLens does cache them too, so even if you have a long loading model, you wait once, takes about a minute if it's a Matterport file, and then you'll never have to wait that minute again. It takes a little while, but not anywhere as much as the first time. Cool. All right, so at that, like I said, I can go a little bit more with this. I think later on, if we get time, if we feel like it, if we got the time, I can go through, here's what it takes to add one of these things. We can do it live, but I think you guys get the point, so I'm gonna segue off, and that's it for TechXR. Cool. All right, and then next on the agenda, James Johnson. And this is, I think, the first accelerated engineering. So lots of really good stuff. Yeah, it's right there. Yeah. Cool.
Oh, yeah. Of course. I thought after last year's Controls Con that we agreed that I wouldn't follow the HoloLens presentation because it's really cool, and now we're going to talk about something a lot more simple, and I suppose I should plug in the HDMI cable so you guys can see things too, right?
And every time he says that, I always say, James, the stuff he's going to talk about this is cool, it's future stuff, we're working with it and all that kind of stuff. It is going to be big eventually, but the stuff that he's talking about is huge for a job. Huge. There was 2 guys up north that I was talking to that I introduced some of these topics to, and they were looking at a 5,000 device job and that, and using templates. He's like, oh my God, Mike, you just saved me 390 man hours. So, yep.
All right.
There you go. James Johnson, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for being here as well for these couple of days. Really enjoy getting to see everybody face to face, and some of you I probably saw at the summit, but most of you probably not, it seems like. So what Mike wanted me to talk about today is templating, and then we're going to have a short break, and then we'll get into some HTML visualization as well, like Mike indicated. So talk a little bit about Niagara templates. And I suspect most of you probably already understand what templates are, but I'm going to go through and talk real quick about some of the basics of what a template is and what some of the files are and where you're going to find them at, and touch a little bit on station templates, but I'm going to try to focus more on component and device templates and show you really quickly about how to build some of those templates and how you go about deploying and updating those templates. So give you some of the idea of some of the workflows and things. When we talk about a template in Niagara 4, it's really this deployable package of things, right? And I'm sure a lot of you probably worked on Niagara back in the R2 days and with AX and everything. And oftentimes you start with stations, right, that you've used on previous projects that have things that typical devices that you're using for VAVs or air handlers or chillers or whatever, and you're using that kind of as a library. But it's more difficult to manage, particularly if you change how you're doing some things, like with your engineering standards about how you're programming or designing graphics. It's like which version of this is this thing that I'm starting with. There might be bloat in that station, right? Lots of other services or users or data and things that you don't realize or remember are there that you need to purge out. So templates give you a better way to organize all those files and keep them together. So in addition to the programming that goes in the station, there might be things like image files and PX files and things like that you want to package together. And that's really what these templates do for you. And it does it with providing some plumbing to give you versioning control as well. So you can have version 1.1, 1.2 of this application as it evolves over time. And it's really easy to update and understand which version is deployed on a particular project. It also really helps you within your own organization if you have multiple employees that do programming to help enforce standards, right? So that everybody's doing things the same way. So that if Bob's out on vacation or got hit by a bus or whatever, right, and somebody has to come behind him and work on a project, they don't have to figure out what was Bob's crazy programming, right? If everybody in the company does it the same way with the standard, right, it's easier to come in and do service work or to help out when things are in a pinch. It also helps and customers in a lot of cases with establishing standards, particularly on large projects where maybe there's not an MSI that's driving all that, but you have multiple contractors that are working on that project. It helps enforce standards across multiple contractors as well. And when we talk about a template file in Niagara, there's going to be a couple of different extensions that you might encounter. But basically, all the template files encapsulate at least two files at a minimum. There's a template bog file, which is going to be like a partial bog of that thing that you created a template of, which might be a BACnet device or a Modbus device, or it could be just some wire sheet logic in a folder or things like that. And there's also a template manifest XML file. So at a minimum, those two files will exist in there. Now, there could be other resource files like images, PX files, HTML files, and things like that included in the template as well. And we have really 4 different kinds of templates, I would say. And then the extension, they're all really zip files is what they are, but they'll have different extensions. So you have NTPL, which will be an extension on a station template, which is a template of an entire station, which is a good starting point. Like when you create a new station, instead of starting with some old station that you have to go cut a bunch of stuff out of and worry about that bloat, you can start with a nice clean station to begin with and then add in the functionality that you need for that project. Those are going to be under your, located under your workbench home or your system home under the new stations, workbench new stations, or it'll be under your Niagara user home under the station templates folder. Then we also have component and device templates, and those also are going to have an NTPL extension, and those will be located under your Niagara user home under the templates folder. And then lastly, which I'm not really going to focus on in this presentation, are application templates, and those are going to be templates of an application controller like an Edge 10, where you get an Edge 10 out of the box and you just want to install literally a station that includes all that application programming for an air handler or fan coil into the device. And those will have an NAPL extension. They'll be located under the application templates folder under your user home. I'm going to jump over to Workbench here in just a second to show you this as well, but this is just kind of a little bit, maybe blown up a little bit easier way to kind of look at the fact that an NTPL file is really just a zip file that has these resources and things underneath it. So we'll pop over here to Workbench. A little bit more interesting way to view things, right, than PowerPoints. Don't want to do death by PowerPoint or anything. So if I look under my Niagara user home, you'll see there's this templates folder here. Yeah, I'll talk about this real quick, and then I'll talk about station templates for a second. This is an NTPL file, and if I double click on it, it's going to load a view here, which is the template view. Come on, computer, you can do it. And I'll go into some more details about it, but there is a UI to look at the template, modify it, look at the versioning and things like that. Now, there's actually a duplicate button here, and if you were ever going to create an offshoot, a branch on your template design, you would want to use the duplicate button here, and I'll explain to you kind of why you want to do that. But I'm going to go in the file space here and just choose duplicate, and I'm going to rename this as .zip file, right? And so you can see that the NTPL is really just a zip file. In this case, it has an images folder that has a bunch of different SVG images. There's a PX folder with lots of PX files that are associated with this. And then there's this template bog file, which is a partial bog file, in this case, of a BACnet device. So I created a template of a BACnet device. So the template bog file will always be called that, but it could be a station. It could be a folder that has logic in it. It could be a network. It could be a device. It could be anything from the station down to something more granular. You'll also see this manifest XML file here, and the XML file is going to give us some information about the template. So you'll see that every template gets a UUID, and that's I don't know how many character, but it's a alphanumeric string that uniquely identifies this template. Even if I had 10 templates called AHU 01 NTPL, they're all going to be unique because they all have their own UUID to them, okay? And that's why you don't want to just duplicate the file and start naming it something else, because you're going to end up with lots of templates that all have the same UUID, and we lose the ability to uniquely identify it. So you want to use the template view and say duplicate, and it'll create a new UUID on that file. But this has information like what version was it created with, things about settings and resources like images and PX files. It also has all the software dependencies here. So it knows what version of Niagara was it created with, and what modules are required on the station in order to deploy the template. So if I went to deploy a BACnet template onto a station, it would need to have obviously the BACnet module installed to be able to do that, right? So that this helps with the versioning control and all that sort of thing, okay? Now, I'm not going to get real in depth with the station templates, but I just want to kind of point this out because I do think it is potentially a big time saver for you with your own, particularly within your own company. If you look at the Workbench new stations under the defaults here, you'll see that there's a bunch of NTPL files here. And these are what you'll see listed like when you go into the tools and new station wizard here, right? So if I stretch this out where you can see a little bit better, right? You're being prompted with the new station wizard to pick from station templates, which is a blank station. I say a blank station, but a pre-configured station with certain services and drivers and things like that in it. And Tridium provides you a bunch of these examples, but you can create additional station templates on your own. So for example, I have this My Company template, which is actually under my user home, under my station templates folder, but it could be here as well. And the idea there is that you could start off with one of these templates to start with, and you could click the duplicate button here, and that would allow you to go and assign a new name to it, a new version, numbering scheme and everything, and then you can go modify that template, right? You could add a weather report if you always use the weather service. You could add the email service, and you could even maybe configure an outgoing account if you have a service account you use to always send alarm emails. You could add all your employees' user accounts under the user service, right? So that when you go to create a new station, it already has all your employees set up as users under the station, right? So the idea is, why do you either want to try to take an existing station and cut all the crap out of it, or why do you want to start with a blank station that we give you and then you have to add a bunch of stuff into it? If you're always going to do it a certain way, then create your own station template, and that way when you start a new station, you have it the way your company wants to do it with your engineering practices, and things are already kind of configured and ready to go, right? So I'm not going to get really any deeper into it right now on the station templates, because everything you can do with a station template, you can do with a component and device template. So we're going to sort of focus on the component template and device template side of things. Another way that you can do a station template, by the way, is you can start with one of those, you can get the station running, and then when the station's running, you can right-click on the config here, and under the templates menu, you can make a station template. So that's another way that you can go about building a station template, is to start with a clean station, put all the stuff you want to have as your base, and then make a station template from the running station. So a couple different ways to do that. Now, in this case, I have under my tag dictionary service here, I have some dictionaries. I have a Niagara dictionary, a Haystack dictionary, and I have a building dictionary, which is my own custom dictionary. And it has some different tag definitions in it. There's some relation definition, and there's a bunch of tag rules and things that are in here as well. And these all line up to my naming conventions for points, right? And the data model that I want to apply to the application, right? And so this is a standard that my company wants to use to do data modeling, which fits into my analytics and into my PX design, into my hierarchies and things like that. If I'm working on a large scale system, or I do this work for lots of customers, right, I want to have this as a standard so that it's easy to identify, like if I've made changes to my engineering standard, things like that. So this would be a good thing to create a template of. And to do that, all I have to do is right click on that component and then choose Make Template. And that's going to open up this template view here, where I can assign a file name here to it, and it's going to create a template underneath my user home here under this templates folder. Now, with 413, we also give you this option with this folder picker. So if you create subfolders under the templates folder, you can organize your templates into subfolders. So it's kind of helpful to be able to do that. And you can see that right now it has a draft version, and there's an option to set it to ready. This is more of really just a process thing to allow you to have a workflow, but it's not a requirement to ever set it to ready. You can deploy a template in a draft state, but it's meant to be kind of like a workflow type thing. There's a component tab here on this, and you'll see that in this case the root component is this tag dictionary, and I can see the property sheet of it. I can look at property sheets, wire sheets, slot sheets. I can change properties. I can do any kind of engineering that I need to do for this particular thing. And there's also a bunch of other tabs that I'm going to talk about more with the device template in a few minutes. But for the component template, and in this case specifically with the tag dictionary, I probably don't have a lot of things that I need to do. I don't really need to use these other tabs, because this is my dictionary and it has all my tags and my relations and my tag rules. I just want to set this as a standard for how I'm going to deploy this, right? So in this case, I'll probably just hit save, because I don't need to really do anything else. And then you can view that template either under the templates folder here. I'll see it there, and I'll also see it listed in my template sidebar here. And so from a workflow perspective, what you probably want to do is we can change this from a draft to a ready state, and then it's going to prompt me to increment the version number on this. And I can give it some other descriptions here, right? Building dictionary, and then I could say like initial dictionary definitions or whatever, right? And then I'll just save those changes. So now this is an indication to me that, hey, this is the approved version that I want everybody in the company to be using, because the template's in a ready state, okay? And there's different ways to deploy component templates. And the simplest way, I'm going to delete my building dictionary here from my supervisor. And one of the most basic ways to deploy a component template is simply to click on it and drag it out to the station. So I'm going to click on the building template in my template sidebar here, and I'm just going to drag it out and drop it on my tag dictionary service. And what that's going to do is it's going to insert that component into the station for me. Now, what did it really do in the background is, under my files, it copied the NTPL file up to the supervisor, so that there's a copy of that building NTPL template on the remote station. It extracted that template bog out of there, and it copied that into the tag dictionary service, because that's where I dropped it. And then it also extracted resources and put them potentially under this PX deploy and the template name here, and it might have brought images and things in as well. So anytime you do a template deployment, it's going to copy the files over, extract them, and put the bits and and pieces where they need to be under the file space and in the component space, okay? Another way that we can go about deploying these templates is that I can right-click on the template either up in the sidebar or up in the nav tree, and it's kind of a weird name, but it says export configs. And what this is going to do is going to prompt me to save an XLSX spreadsheet somewhere under my workbench home, or my Niagara user home under my workbench. So it's going under my templates folder, and it doesn't have to match, but in this case I'm just going to leave it alone and say building XLSX, and I'll save the file. If you have things in that BOG file that are passwords, like if there was a credentials for a station connection or something like that, it's prompting me here to encrypt that information in the spreadsheet so somebody can't just go in the spreadsheet and see what all my passwords are. But I don't have any passwords, so I don't need to encrypt the document here. And I also don't have any additional tags or anything that I want to set up, so I just hit no there. Now, I can't open the spreadsheet really in Workbench here, but if I go look at this, I can click launch and it'll open up my Excel spreadsheet, right? And in this case, this is a very, very basic example. I'm going to show you something more complex here with a device template in just a couple minutes. But what I want to point out here is there's some description information, the template name, the version, and we have some columns and things here. And the other thing that's important to understand with the spreadsheet is if we look at the name manager, and this might be a little bit of an eye chart up there. Not sure how well you guys can see from the back of the room, but what this is, I just want to point out is that the spreadsheet knows about the template that it was created from, right? So it knows the name of the NTPL file. It knows the title of it. It knows the UUID of the template that it was generated from and what version of the template and who the vendor was and things. So all that information is stored as metadata inside that spreadsheet, right? And so the idea here, if you hover over these cells that have the little red corner on them, it tells you the information. So what we want to do with the spreadsheet is we can say, hey, what's the slot path in a station where I want to go deploy this component template to, or slot paths. So for every row in the spreadsheet, I'm telling it where in a station to go deploy this thing as a template, right? So you still have to have some intimate knowledge about the station, obviously, right? And in this case, if it tells you no leading forward slashes or trailing, and it's going to start with whatever's at the root of the station, essentially. So because if you're not cheating, you're not trying. That's what my engineer used to tell me all the time when I was on the boat. But I would want to deploy it, right, in this case, under the tag dictionary service. So I'm just going to copy that, come over here, and paste this into the cell. Now, what it's telling me is I don't want the station slot colon or anything, and there's no leading slash, so I'm going to delete everything up to the slot path there. So I'm just going to be left with services / tag dictionary in this case, all right? You can also configure the deployed name here. So like in this case, I'm just going to call it building. You could assign a display name here if you wanted to. If you really wanted to get frisky, you can specify the XY coordinates of where in the wire sheet it's going to get positioned, how wide the glyph is going to be, and that kind of stuff too. But for me in this case, what I want to show you, really this is all I need to configure in the spreadsheet. So I'm just going to save it and close the spreadsheet out, okay? So we want to talk about then how can I utilize this. So in my environment here, my supervisor is talking to several JACEs. And if I look under my JACE controllers here at the tag dictionary service, you'll notice that I have a Niagara and a haystack, but I don't have a building dictionary in my JACE stations. So what I want to do is using the provisioning in the supervisor then, we've got the Niagara network set up, and I can go to the provisioning. Now, if I want to use provisioning to deploy things with templates, I need to copy the template files in the spreadsheet up to the supervisor. So the supervisor has a copy of that. And we give you kind of a convenient way to do that here is this copy templates button on the provisioning manager view. When I click that, it's going to prompt me to select a spreadsheet, a template file, and an Excel file. So I need to do the NTPL and the spreadsheet. So I'm going to pick my building NTPL and my building XLSX file here. I'll hit OK. and that copies it up to the supervisor under a folder called template cache. Now, I could have done that myself. That's just a kind of convenient way of doing it. But basically, it creates this template cache folder here under the file space, and it copied the NTPL and the spreadsheet up there. And I could have just done that manually, but it's just kind of a convenience to do it through the manager view, okay? Once I have the files at the supervisor, I can click plus here, and there's a job step that's to deploy a template. And so what that's going to do is allow me to pick from my template cache folder. I'm going to pick the spreadsheet that I went through and put all the configuration information into, and it's going to ask me for a password if it was, properties that were password encrypted on the spreadsheet. And then I'm going to pick which stations do I want to deploy this against, right? So I'll say I want to go deploy this against these J stations. And what will happen then when I run this job is the supervisor is going to go connect to all the stations that I told it to. It's going to copy the NTPL file out there, extract everything, and it's going to install the components wherever they were configured in the spreadsheet to be installed. And I realize this is just one component being added to each station, but if you have a project where you've got 10 or 50 or 100 or God forbid thousands in some cases, right, on large projects, then this definitely gives you a quick way to do this engineering effort, right, and to be able to standardize on these things. And you can see now that that building dictionary now is down in my J station as well. When you look at any of the stations where you've deployed things using a template, we have a template manager view here. And this is going to show you all the instances of things in the station that have been deployed using a template, a component template or a device template. And it shows me the slot path to them, the name of the template, who the vendor is, what the version of it is, if there's inputs and outputs and relations, are they linked and things like that, and what version is installed and is it up to date. So this is going to let me know, hey, what version of my engineering standard is deployed on this project, right? So if down the road I decide I need to make changes to my design and my standard, then that's what we're going to do. And if I'm going to do something like that, and I realize this is just a very basic example, guys, I'm going to show you something a little bit more complex here in a minute. Probably the first thing I would do if I'm going to make changes to my template is I would want to make a copy of the existing template, because this is my version 1.1, right? So before I make a change, I'm going to copy this file, and then I would go paste it somewhere else that I would keep a copy of that older version of my template, right? So then I can use my my template view here, and maybe I want to go under my tag definitions, and I'm just going to keep this simple as well. I'm just going to duplicate one of these tags here, and I'll call this like my campus marker tag now, okay? But obviously it could be way more complex than that. Once you make any kind of change, the template gets set back into a draft mode to indicate that some change has been made, right? So I'm going to save my change, and then I'm going to change it back to a ready state, which is going to have me want to increment my version number. So if I go take a look in my supervisor station where I deployed that template manually, and just by dragging and dropping it, I'll go take a look here at my template service, and you'll see now that I have 1.1 version installed in the station, but I have version 1.2 available in my Workbench client. So it's now telling me that the deployed template instance is out of date. I have a newer version available that I can upgrade. So to do that, you just select that item and you can click the upgrade button, and then it's kind of like the software manager. You're then going to do a commit, and it's going to ask you, hey, are you really sure you want to do this? And I say yes, and it's going to go through, and really it removes the existing thing, puts in the new version of it, and maintains the state of what things were. And there's a document in the help that explains everything that gets maintained, like links and relations and tags and persistent properties and like states of history extensions and all kinds of things, okay? Now, that's pretty easy when it's something like this in that station. And with provisioning, we also have other job steps that are related to that as well, for doing things like updating deployed instances. So in this case, I made a change to my template file, right? So I'm gonna click the copy templates button again, And in this case, I just want to copy my building NTPL file up to the supervisor because that's 1.2 version. I need to go put that on my supervisor so it's available to push down to the J stations. And once we do that, and I probably already have a job built, or I could just do it here in the view here. So here's a job prototype that I have set up. And in this case, it's saying I want to upgrade the deployed instances of the building template. So when you go to add job steps here, you'll see like there's the deploy template, which is the one I used a second ago. And then there's also like install application template. That would be a provisioning job that could install an application template to a bunch of edge controllers. There's also there's a upgrade or update template or application template configuration. I'll talk a little bit more about configuration properties in a few minutes. Upgrade application template, and then there's an upgrade template job step. So this is the job step that I'm running now. And when you click that job step, it just wants you to select the NTPL file. It doesn't need the spreadsheet because the thing's already deployed in the station, and it knows what template they're deployed with and what version, so it knows, hey, I don't have, the list is everything that's in the station is what I'm telling it to go do in that case. So again, you tell it what stations to go install that thing into, and if I just sort of expand this here and see the tag dictionary service and tell the job to run, then what'll happen is that building dictionary will get deleted that's out there, and then it'll get put back in, and probably happened, yeah, we saw it actually, disappeared there for a split second and copied it back in. And then if I take a look at my template service in that remote station now, I'll see that the tag dictionary is up to my new engineering standard, okay? So it's real easy once you've created something like, a dictionary, or sorry, a template of your tag dictionary. It's very easy to keep that in sync across all of your JACEs and all your supervisors on a given project, or if you just change the way you do your engineering and things like that, and you're going from project to project, it's easy to know what version, okay? Now, a bit more complex example is talking about component template. So in this case, I have a BACnet device here that has multiple PX views assigned to it, has a bunch of points already configured. The points have history extensions and alarm extensions and things like that, right? I may have data modeling assigned to it and everything. And this is my standard device that my company installs for an air handler whenever we're doing projects, right? It could be a VAV controller, a fan box, a fan coil, air handler, whatever it might be, or a rooftop or something, right? So what I want to do is I want to create a template of this BACnet device. And the way I do that, same way I just did the component template, I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to choose make template. And this is going to, again, start that template wizard here. And I can give it a file name here. Again, I can save it in folders, a vendor. I can give it a description, VT8600, BACnet, HU or whatever, and I can say, VT8600, one heat gas, one cool DX with economizer or whatever I want to say here, right? Just give it some kind of description. And again, there's a component tab. I can get into, the wire sheet views, and I can make programming changes and things like that if I need to. All your same kind of logic controls and stuff like that are there. Now, when we deploy a device template in particular, we're probably going to need to set some things uniquely on each deployed instance of that template. For example, with the air handler here, it has an address property, right? And the address property in this case is saying, what's the network number, what's my MAC address, what type of address style is it, things like that, right? Those all need to be configurable because each device, when I deploy this thing, each device needs to have a uniquely set address, right? They can't all be addressed the same thing. I might want to add the enabled property as a configuration property so I can enable and disable devices. When you talk about BACnet objects, right, there's a device object and there's an object ID, right? So every BACnet device on the network needs to have a unique device object ID. So that needs to be a configuration property. Things like set points, right, that I want to be able to change set points. So like my cool set point or my heat set point, or it might be your box area, your K factor, your min max flow set points and things like that. Anything you want to set uniquely needs to be a configuration property, right? Then we also have relations. And so relations, if hopefully everyone's familiar with data modeling, but relations are describing metadata in the application, saying how is the equipment related, like what air handler supplies the VAV, or what chiller supplies the coil to the air handler, or what electrical panel is this thing powered from, and those sorts of relations. In this case, I'm doing some haystack modeling in the station as well, so I want to set up a site ref relation saying what site component or what space, there might be a space ref or a site ref. In this case, I'll just show an example of doing a space ref. And so the idea is you can look through the list, or you can also just click the add button here and you can type in something ad hoc, but I'll find HS site ref here. And when you add that, by default, it's going to be an inbound relation, but you can select that relation, you can toggle it here and reverse it, so I can say it's an outbound relation. So I want to have a relation from my equipment to the site component to say this is a piece of equipment that's part of the site. And within the data model in my station, I have an HS site marker tag on the thing that's the site component. So we have a relate hints property here, and what this is an equal query to help you find and narrow down the things in the station that would match. So I can say HS site, for example, anything with a site marker tag would be a candidate for me to want to relate this piece of equipment to. Right? So we're trying to narrow down the choices when somebody deploys it. And you can also put in a user tip to help them explain what are they doing in the process of deployment, right? So select the desired site component or whatever you want to give them as a tip there, okay? So you can add as many relations to or from this component, this device, once it's deployed in the station, we want to create those relations, right? Match it up to things. We also have, obviously, the concept of data links. So I have a schedule that's linked into my occupancy command, right? So this, all right, get a little bit, if I can get my mouse to work, get a little bit more real estate here. So I have a schedule right now that was linked into N16 on this occupancy point before I even created a template of it. So the template process creating it saw that link and already created this for me. And I have one for outside air temperature, and there happens to be something linked into my unlock cooling set point, which I don't really want in this case, so maybe I'll remove that one. You can add other links if you need to. So like, for example, if I wanted to link the output of the supply fan to something, I just double click on that and it adds another row here that's saying I need to link the out slot of my supply fan to something else in the station, right? So you can define what those links are going to be into and out of this device once I deploy it in the station. Similar to the relations, when you click on any of these links, you'll see in this bottom right corner, there's similar things like a user tip. So I can say, select the desired weekly schedule or whatever you want to give it as a tip there, okay? And in this case, in my station, I've got a bunch of different schedules here, weekly schedules, and if I look at the tags on these schedules, we'll see that I've got a tag rule that actually applies a B:weekly schedule marker tag to any of the weekly schedule components. So that's an easy way for me to find the schedules in the station that I can prompt the user with to say, which one of these schedules should you link to the occupancy, right? I want to narrow the list of things down. So in this case, for my bind hint, then I would put B:weekly schedule. The target slot hint is kind of not named well, I would say, but what it's saying is, what slot am I linking to or from? So if it's an inbound link, what's the name of the slot on the remote component I'm linking from? If it's an outbound link, what's the name of the slot I want to link to? So if it's an inbound link, in most cases, it's probably going to be coming from something called an out slot typically, right? But it could be something else. If it's an outbound link, it might be in 16 or in 10 or something, but you're just telling it which slot am I going to be linking to or from. Another change that we implemented in 4.13 is the slot path scope here. And what this is, I think that's a 4.13, it might be a 4.14. My brain's slipping a little bit on that one. The idea there is you can, just like in the spreadsheet where I put the path saying services/tag dictionary, I can put a path and tell it to limit the scope of where it's going to go search in the station to do that in equal query to find the matching components. So that's some new functionality that we've given you to kind of scope that down some. Now, I would do the same thing for outside air temperature. In this case, I've got sort of a simulation point. If I look under my weather service here in my weather report, I've got this component here called current, and this has some tags on it that help me identify it as an outside air temperature sensor, right? So I have a HS outside air temp sensor marker tag, and I have, in this case, a B:global trying to say, hey, I've got lots of OA temp sensor points on my station, but this is my global sensor, right? Before we had the scope, then you really had to do something like put a marker tag on it to say that's the global point, right, to help narrow things down. But in this case, what I could do is I could say, select global OA temp sensor as my tip. I want to link from the out slot on the control point. And my bind tip might just, in this case, be HS outside air temp sensor. And the slot path scope could be, something to like this weather report or this weather service, right? So I could just say copy there, and just like I did with the spreadsheet, I'm going to get rid of the leading station slot:/, and it's just going to be that slot path in the station. It's got to be an absolute slot path, and it's just saying go narrow your search down to only find something under the weather service that has that outside air temp sensor marker tag on it, right? The other thing we have here is the graphics tab, and from here you can edit any of the graphics that are assigned to components under the device. You could right-click and add a new view here. You can right-click on, and edit the existing views or remove the views and things like that, but it just lets you manage all the PX views that are assigned to this component. The other thing that we do support, and I don't really suggest people do it, but we do have this concept of subtemplates, which I always joke around and say it's kind of like DiCaprio in the movie Inception, right? Like it's the dream inside the dream inside the dream, okay? The idea is that you could have like a cooling only VAV template, and then you could have a subtemplate that was just your reheat coil, your hot water valve, your reheat coil, and your sensor or something, and you could drop that in as a subtemplate of it. Or you might have an air handler template, and then you might create an analytics template that has like fault detection logic and drop that in as a sub-template under your air handler or something like that. It's supported, but it can get a little bit more complex and confusing, so I kind of steer away from it a little bit in that sense. But now, as far as, I guess I need to save this, right? Would be a good start. So once you save a template and you set it into your ready state and things like that, just like a component template, you could just drag and drop. So I could look at my device manager view here in BACnet, and I could just go select this template here, or the one I just saved, or the one I have already prepped, like the cooking show thing, and I can drag that out and drop it onto my floor. The other thing that you can do though is when and I'm not going to find any devices here because I don't have any actual BACnet devices connected to my station, but there is a dev template mode that you can turn on here. And the idea is then when you go out on a job and you hit discover and you go find all these BACnet devices or LAN devices or Modbus or whatever, you can select them all and then you can pick the template that you want to use to add those devices to the station. So now they're going to come in with all the points mapped, all the histories, all the alarms, all the graphics assigned, everything to your engineering standard, right? Everything's in exactly the same spot and all that kind of stuff. Now, to show you real quickly how we can do this offline is if I select a template, then I can click new, and and I could say I want to add maybe 2 BACnet devices here to the station. Typical new dialog, I'm just going to say okay, and what it's going to do is it's going to kick off the deployment process. And the same process happened with my tag dictionary template, but it was just really quick because there wasn't anything to pick from. I didn't set up any configuration properties or relations or links or any of that kind of stuff, right? So in this case, you'll see then it says, all right, select the floor this AHU serves, right? And it's trying to create the site ref relation for me. And it searched the station, and it only found one thing in the station that had that site marker tag on it. So it went ahead and selected it for me because there's only one option, right? So we're trying to simplify things here. So I click OK. Then it says, all right, select the schedule, right? And so it comes up with all these schedules that it found in the station using that B:, weekly schedule marker tag. And if it's a long list, then you can start typing things and narrow that list of components down as well, right? So if it really returned a long list. But this is trying to narrow down for whoever's deploying the template to say, these are the likely candidates to link from to control my occupancy, right? So I pick the schedule, and then it's going to say, hey, what about this outside air sensor, the global, and it found, again, in this case, one component. So, and then it'll tell me, hey, this is what I did for you. I created all these data links, I created all these relations. In this case, it's just for 2 devices, but it might be for 25 devices or 50 devices or whatever you're adding to the station, right, at the same time. Then we get to the configuration properties page, right? So this is where I would select, an individual device, and I would set maybe the device object ID and the MAC address, right? And I would do the same thing for the other air handler, right? And I could change my configuration properties like my set points, my area, K-factor, box flow, things like that. And then you get one final dialog that just says, hey, do I need to change any of these things? And you can see that it added those devices, right? And these devices have the graphics assigned to them. They already have all the points mapped under them the way they were set up in my template, and they have all of the alarms and histories and all that kind of stuff as well, okay? The other thing that we can obviously do with this is that we can set up spreadsheets and we can export that configuration. And I'll show you an example of this here of what the spreadsheet looks like. I'm gonna, got like maybe 3 minutes here to kind of finish up, and then we'll take a quick break. So in this case, this spreadsheet is a little bit more complex, but you can see it's got a slot path at the BACnet network. So you can see, right? Can you guys see that okay? Do I need to zoom in a little bit? The thing about Excel is it makes it real easy to do data entry, right? So like I can click and drag and it increments, numbering schemes for my devices and my display names and my names and all that kind of stuff, right? So it makes it really easy to kind of start plugging in values from equipment schedules and things like that. You'll see in blue here are my data links. It uses kind of 3 columns here, but you're specifying the name of the component you want it to be linked to, what's the the name of the slide is linked from, and is there a scope to narrow down to search for, just like I was answering when I did everything manually. And you can see for the relations, your configuration properties like object ID, MAC address, things like that are all going to be able to be configured in this spreadsheet, right? And so I can do this a lot more quickly, or I can have someone that's not as savvy about Niagara or the system to come in and do all this data entry, get everything set up for me. There's a couple different ways that we can deploy this then. One way is to go into the template view in the station. So I'm going to go down to my JStation here and go to the template manager view again. And when I look at this view, there's a bulk deploy from Excel here. And what this allows me to do then is pick that spreadsheet, and it's going to go through and do the deployment for me without me having to answer any questions, because all the questions have already been answered in the spreadsheet. And it's going to deploy all those devices, create all the relations and the data links and all that sort of stuff. The other option that you have here is this update configs from Excel. So the idea there is maybe I fat-fingered those configuration properties when I was doing the data entry, or something's changed. And what I can do is just go back into Excel and update all my configuration properties, come back in here and just say, push all these config properties out to all the things that are in the station. So it doesn't redeploy them, but it'll go through and set all the configuration properties up for me. And so that can be real helpful as well. The other thing that you can do, which I already showed you, is deploying using provisioning, right? So using a provisioning job step, I can use that to deploy using my spreadsheet, I can deploy that same template out to another station here. So I'll show you under the BACnet network here, right? There's nothing under the station. So I can run this job and it'll connect to, again, just like I did with the tag dictionary template, it's gonna push that NTPL file out to the J station, and then it's going to extract the files out under the PX deploy and everything, and it's gonna start pushing devices down. Oh, got a failure there.
Floor 2, I think, James, right? The other one was floor 1.
Building 1, floor 2. Yeah, it should have been. Should have looked at the failure. Oh, it doesn't exist. There, yeah, that's a good reason to fail, right? So I didn't copy my template in my spreadsheet up to the supervisor, so I needed to have this NTPL file, and this spreadsheet needed to be up in my template cache, and then I can run it again. So that was me just not following my own steps there. So it should start running and pop things in there. So anyway, hopefully you guys take away from this is that these are ways to enforce engineering standards within your own company, as well as multiple contractors working on the same project for a customer. And you can change your engineering strategies and understand what versions have been deployed. And there's a lot of tools to be able to update and fix, all these configuration property values and things like that. So you should really look at it.
Yeah, like I was saying, it was incredible, the time savings that a couple of contractors we worked with, that it's a simple thing that's out there. It's been out there for a while, man.
It's not a perfect fit for every device, by the way, and not knocking on any devices or anything, but the earlier generation spiders, for example, with the virtual XL10 bogs, some of the earlier disk tech controllers don't work well because of a similar kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And John, you can confirm, right? The newer spiders, device templating works well with the newer spiders?
The entire device, not just part of the application. As long as we do the entire device, it works fine.
The whole device,
awesome.
That works fine. So yeah, it won't fit every application, and not every one-off. Like just because you got a physical plant with chillers and cooling towers and whatever doesn't mean go make a template of it. If it's a one-off thing, it probably doesn't make sense. But if it's something you use on every job, it probably makes sense.
Yeah, super cool.
So, all right, quick break.
Yeah, sounds good. We'll just take a 5, 10, whatever heck minute break, and then filter back in. We'll keep going. But yeah, thank you, James.
All right.
James's next presentation on HTML visualization, and goes over some APIs. It's really awesome. Can enable a lot of stuff for you guys, especially more technical ones, etc. Yeah. Should be awesome. Lay on, James.
All right. So everybody, if you want to quiet down, we'll go ahead and get started again. You got stuck with me for an extra little bit here, and then we're going to have some open Q&A kind of stuff. So what we're going to talk about here is HTML visualization, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about serving files from the file space, show you some examples of using HTML direct from the file space, and doing some other examples with like Apache Velocity and some cloud-based type dashboarding, like using something like Grafana or Power BI or something to try to pull information from Niagara with some of the different APIs that are available. So a couple things just to kind of run through here, and I'm going to kind of bounce back and forth a little bit between some PowerPoints and with Workbench and a browser to show you things. We do support serving HTML files directly from the file space, but with that said, I would say there's a few caveats. One is that you don't really have version control, but that's kind of the same thing with just even PX files, right? If you've got PX files in the file space, then you don't know who edited them, or you don't have a version control where you can revert to the previous version or things like that, right? But so it's not really much different than having PX files directly in the file space. I think the little bit of the aspect of it, though, is there's obviously, vulnerabilities that creep into JavaScript libraries or in the way HTML code's written and things like that. So it does put a little bit more onus on you for kind of making sure that your JavaScript and your HTML is up to date with like security type things, where if it's packaged as a view in something in a module, then you're kind of getting the plumbing of the framework in general that's keeping all those libraries up to date and things like that, right? So, but it's just something to kind of be aware of a little bit, right? Now, when you access files from the station's file space, there's really two file access methods or servlets. One is the file servlet, which is the top example, and I'll show you these here in just a second in the browser as well. And that's going to give you just the raw HTML file. And then the other one is the ORD scheme. So you have /ORD and then the file path to the file. That's going to keep it within the context of the profile you're logged in with. So if it's the HTML5 profile, you're going to have potentially the sidebars and things like that are available, and it's going to load the HTML within that view pane. A couple other things to keep in mind if you're working with HTML files. The station does like to do what we call snooping, meaning it's going to look at the content that's going to be served up to the client, and it's potentially going to massage some of the things that you have in the files. If you don't want it to, you just add a comment to the file, and the comment syntax is slightly different between HTML and CSS, but it's just a comment saying, hey, Niagara, don't snoop on the file and modify anything. It's also pretty common to want to use JavaScript libraries, right, with HTML. And that's one of the big tools and benefits of doing HTML is that there's all kinds of different JavaScript libraries out there that people have created that do all kinds of whiz-bang cool stuff. So instead of you having to create all this functionality from scratch, you can just use one of these existing libraries. And there's an application called Require.js, which is it's a tool to asynchronously load JavaScript into your web page. And Tritium uses it quite extensively in all the core stuff that we do, and we have plugins or the syntax and capabilities for you to leverage Require.js as well. It can really help improve like the speed, the load times of your web pages and your JavaScript code and that sort of thing. I've got a reference here, and I assume we're going to be sharing a PDF of the presentation, so you don't have to necessarily worry about trying to jot all this down or take pictures of it, but there's a link there to the help file, and it explains the syntax that you would put into your files if you're going to leverage the Require.js, right? And this is just a very, very basic example of an HTML page. So you've got your tags, and in this case I have the no snoop at the top as an example, and I have my JavaScript there that's loading the Require.js libraries there. And this example really just does something basic. It just opens up a dialog is really kind of all it does. So we'll go into the station here, and I'll take a look at my file space here and just show you that there's this basic HTML file here, right? I can look at the text editor view and see the no snoop syntax here. That's a comment. And then I have my 2 lines of JavaScript that are telling it to go load the Require.js to use that library. And then I have just a real basic HTML page. So I'm using Require.js to call a function here, which is using Baja script. And all it's really doing is making an ORD that maps to the root of the station, and then I'm going to open up an alert, a dialog that says, hey, this is the station name. Like it's just a sort of a hello world example, okay? So if I open up my browser, and just to tell you, I have a client certificate authentication set up in the station, and my browser's configured with that PKI certificate. I didn't want to fool around with having to keep typing login names and passwords. So I'm not using no authentication, I'm using client certificate here. So don't think I'm pulling the wool over your eyes. When I click on this web page, this is going to load because the client certificate authentication does it in the background. So this is that web page, and it's using the file ORD here. You can see this file /HTML basic HTML, and that just opens an alert that just gives me some information. If I look at the same web page, but I do it with the HTML5 profile, you'll see that it loads that content in the view pane, and I still get that same alert dialog, but in this case, my URL has that ORD path in it and everything, right? And so I get the Chrome of my profile, so I still get my nav sidebar and things like that, but I get HTML content served up from the station in that pane there, okay? Now, talking about those libraries, obviously, that help with JavaScript and everything, we do have a Baja script library that comes with Niagara. And this is a JavaScript library that we give you guys that helps you build applications. So it's going to help you to resolve things in the station, to be able to display data, to read and write data, and things like that. And this is all covered in mostly in the doc developer. I'll show you. I can show you where that is. And there's a lot of tutorials and things that that you can get into. So if I take a look at the workbench help here, and you look under doc developer, and under the user interface topic, there's the open web technologies here. And this goes into using required JS and serving HTML files from the file space, all that kind of stuff that I was talking about. But there's a help topic on Baja script here, which has all kinds of documentation about the different JavaScript classes and what you can do. There's tutorials in here that you can click on and work through. There's also a palette, actually, in the doc developer palette. And when you look at the doc developer palette, there's Baja script and Baja UX examples and things that you can drag into the station. And what these will allow you to do is they have little components that you can click on. And this is going to load some JavaScript code, and it's going to show you examples of how to do things with Baja script. And then you can click the play button, and the play button is going to do something like render some HTML content to show you what's this JavaScript actually doing. Okay, so there's some functional examples here of doing different things with Baja script that you can start off with and kind of learn about, as well as the tutorials that are in the help section there. All right. Now, in this case, and I haven't seen Aaron Rickle around or anything, but this was something that Aaron and I worked on a little while ago for a customer. And so I'm going to kind of jump in with both feet here and just show you an example, and I'm going to turn around and kind of start showing you a little bit more basics about it. This station is set up as like an enterprise security station, meaning like door control, access control, and that kind of stuff. And so there's intrusion zones and things that are set up, and the intrusion zones have an intrusion display meant to like arm and disarm the zone, right, as you enter or leave a building for like a burglar alarm type stuff, right? And this intrusion display from back in the AX days has this really crappy little Java-based UI on it that mimics a keypad that would let me like arrow around to do things and interact to arm and disarm the zone, right? And at some point in time, we kind of those went obsolete. We stopped selling those, and we started just using like Android tablets as intrusion devices. And with that, we added a PX view here to the intrusion zone display. And so this is just a PX file that is designed to sort of mimic that, and you could have that load up on on the tablet and use that to arm and disarm zones and stuff. But that's not super sexy, and maybe it doesn't work as well as it could, as far as like playing sounds and all that kind of stuff. So what we did in this case to help a customer and show sort of possibilities is we created an HTML file, and it uses JavaScript and everything as well. So when I look at the, and I'm not going to go into all the weeds on this, by the way, but this is an HTML file. It's loading JavaScript libraries, loading the required JS, and then it's using JavaScript to set some variables that are basically the slot path to the things in the station that we need to interact with, right? So it's setting it to this intrusion display and the intrusion zone itself, so that the HTML and the JavaScript can load that information and interact with it. It's relatively basic HTML, I would say. It's basically loading a bunch of buttons and things like that and labels. The meat of it, and I'm going to show you much simpler examples here in a second, but the meat of it is basically just a lot of JavaScript that was written to interact with the buttons and the things on the page, okay? So the idea there is that I can have a graphic that's an HTML graphic that's been built, and this is maybe a sexier, more functional graphic that can load on any kind of touchscreen device, right, that has a client certificate to authenticate to the station. And I can do things like, arm and disarm the zone or whatever, right, and I can interact with it to, put in my pins and things like that, and I can arm and disarm the zone, whatever. And so you can make it look, whatever color schemes and how you want to as far as, the aesthetics of it and everything. It's a pretty flexible type thing to do. Now, I'll try to show you, I'm going to step back because that's kind of a deep example, but I just wanted to show you it as an example. And we'll talk a little bit about Apache Velocity, and I'll start showing you some more basics of HTML pages and some things that we can do in the station here. So there's something called Apache Velocity, which is not anything that Tritium created. It's actually, Apache.org is the website. And what they've done is they've created a templating language that can be used in HTML, and it allows you to basically call Java code inside of your HTML to do some cool things like dynamic content and to build things out in your web page. And so there's this whole VTL, Velocity Templating Language, that you can learn about, and there's information in the Workbench help, but you can also go to Apache's website and learn about the VTL language. Again, it's not something that Tritium created, we just implement it. So you'll see directives that start with the pound character, and variables start with a $sign character, and you can do things, pretty creative things actually, with this, all right? So I'm going to go over and show you in the Workbench. So let's go back here, and I'll close this out, get it out of my way. So there is an AX Velocity, and it's AX because it started out in Niagara AX, and we just never renamed the module, but there's a Velocity Servlet component that you can drop into your station. So it's, in this case, under my services here in my station, I have this Velocity Servlet that I've dropped in. And when you look at the Velocity Servlet, it has a configurable servlet name property. So I'm going to access the Velocity Servlet in the station by going to the URL of the station / velocity in this case, but you can customize it to be whatever you want it to be, okay? And the Velocity Servlet has this document manager view on it, and the document manager allows you to define a name, so that's going to be the further path on the servlet, so it'd be /velocity /AHU01, and you're mapping that basically to an HTML file, but it's going to have a .vm extension on it because it's using the VTL syntax in it, but it's really just an HTML file. And so all I'm doing is defining that and mapping it to that HTML file, okay? Now, the other thing is about these velocity documents is you can give them what's called velocity context. So I want to create a variable. In this case, the variable is named device, right? And it's going to point to air handler 1 in the station. So I'm creating a variable that I can access in my JavaScript, in my HTML, and do something with that, right? So the idea, if I go take a look at my velocity document that I have here, I have this AHU VM file, which again is really just an HTML file, right? So I can see HTML file, but I'm using this VTL syntax, and I'm getting the variable, the device variable from the velocity context so that I can get its display name of the component, or I'm using that to get the points extension here from that component when it loads. And then I can use a little script here that's going to get an array of all the control points that are underneath that points extension. And then with HTML and a little syntax here, I'm just doing a for loop that says, hey, go iterate through all these things I found, and let's display some labels and values about the content, right, the information. And it's referencing an external CSS file here, which happens to be this CSS file right here, so that's how I'm going to do the styling, like the font size and the font weight and the colors and all that kind of stuff, right? So if I go take a look here at my velocity servlet, right? So the URL I'm connecting to the station, and then it's /velocity because that's my servlet URL, and then / whatever the document name is. So this is a web page that's just loading and showing me the point data, for this air handler, right? And if I change this to air handler 2, then it's going to load the velocity document for air handler 2, right? So you can see with just 8 lines of HTML or something, and me declaring this velocity document, I'm able to create a web page that's going to display all this information for me, instead of using a PX page, if that's what I want to do. Now that's a very basic example, obviously. There's lots of other examples that I can show you here, and I'll try to show a few things, and I want to show you some APIs and things as well, but I'll show you a little bit more with the velocity examples here. So in this case, I've got a velocity document called energy, right, that maps to this energy VM file, and then the document has a variable called schema, and it maps to a JSON component that I have in the station here. And so if I go look at my Google chart example here, and I look at my energy data component, what this is a JSON schema component, and it's querying the station, under here, not under config. It's doing a query here for a history file for a period of last week, and then it's giving me timestamp and value, right? So when I resolve that query, I'm getting a table of timestamps and values, right? And so I'm using that information here in my JSON output, and you can control what the format of that data is. There's a lot of different ways that you can make this data render in the JSON here. Now in this case, I wanted to have an array that was the header and then arrays of the values, the timestamp and the value for that data, okay? When I take a look at my energy VM file here, and just do the AX text editor, right? This, again, is not a lot of code, okay? What I'm doing is I'm loading a JavaScript library from Google, which is a charting library. And then I have some JavaScript here, and it's going to use that Google charting library, and it's going to load the core chart function. And then when the page loads, I'm going to tell it to call this draw chart function. And the draw chart function right here then says, I want you to go get your data by reading this JSON payload from the station. So go get my timestamps and value array and load it into this variable called data, and then I'm going to tell it to draw a chart with the options that I feed into it, right? So the idea here then is that I can have a web page being served up from my station using a Google charting library, right? And this is what the Google chart library, what that chart looks like when it renders. But I can change, that's an area chart, right? I can say, no, I want that really to be a bar chart or something, and save it. And I just go back over here and refresh, right? And it's a bar chart, right? Instead of a line chart or an area chart or things like that. I have another example with, and again, I'm just going to kind of work through these really quickly, but this alarm example, it's basically mapping to these 3 control points here in the station, right? So I have variables called critical, medium, and low that are variables in my velocity context. And so then if I look at my alarm VM file here, same kind of thing. Instead of like referencing a JSON schema and getting that JSON payload off of it, then I'm going to declare the data as rows here, and I'm using the velocity context. So I'm saying, go get the critical variable and get the out slot and get its value. Go get the medium variable, get the out slot and the value, and so forth, right? So I'm loading the data from the station using that velocity context, and now I can tell the Google chart library to display charts to display that information, right? So these are just other examples. So like this is a Google pie chart or donut chart if you specify, the middle of the chart to be a hole. And these are, bar chart examples, right? And so maybe these are nicer, different charts that you want to utilize in your UI with your customer. You can build these kind of HTML files and reference these JavaScript libraries. This is a gauge example. This one has, again, some variables which are the power, the water, and the gas, right? So these are velocity context variables that are mapping to these points in the station. And this is a bit more of a complex example, showing you, because it can get more complex, obviously, that you need to do some things, right? Because right now what I've shown you is just really is reading initial values, but if those values change over time, you'd have to refresh the web page to see things update. So in this case, I'm still using the Google charting library, but I'm also using the required JS here. And what I'm doing is using required JS and the Baja script library, and I'm going to actually subscribe to those components in the station. So then the web page will get value updates whenever the value is changing in the station, and I can dynamically change the content that's being displayed in the web page then, right? By having a subscriber that's going to keep the variable up to date in the station. So what that looks like in that case is, this is an example of using the Google Gauge library. And so you have control over styling of what do the gauges look like, where do my orange, yellow range colors, and what's the scale, and all these kinds of things. And the web page is subscribed to those data points, so as the values change, you can see the gas gauge is ticking up slowly and the other two gauges are moving around or whatever, right? So I have to incorporate a little Baja script to get the values subscribed and updated, and then I'm using JavaScript with the Google charting library maybe to show you what some of that stuff looks like, right? What's important also from a cybersecurity standpoint to understand when you're working with things like this is that the web server itself has a lot of protection built in for the client browser to protect it from nefarious code and things that might be going on, right? So you have the HTTP header providers under the web service, and these have things like cross-site scripting and settings and stuff like that. In this case, most importantly, is the content security policy settings. And what you'll see here is that I had to make some changes to this to allow that type of stuff to work, right? So, for example, when the web page loads, the server tells the client, is it okay to load this information from somewhere? So like the script source says, is it okay to, I had to add an entry here to say it's okay to go load JavaScript from this URL from Google's website, right? Because I'm referencing those Google libraries, right? So I had to tell the station to tell the client browser it's safe to go load this JavaScript from some external server, okay? I had to do the same thing like with styling, because the Google JavaScript library also uses CSS files on their own website, right? So I had to tell the client browser it's okay to go load this CSS file from this remote server. So just understand, if you are doing stuff like this, that you do have to go in and tweak some of these HTTP header providers in particular to allow some of that stuff to load, okay? All right, so we also want to show you some external web content, and well, actually, let's talk about Baja UX real quick too. So Baja script we already talked about, and I know the terms get a little confusing at times, a little overlap or something, but we also have something that's called Baja UX. So Baja script is a JavaScript library that helps you build web applications. Baja UX is a framework that allows you to package HTML views and CSS and things into a module, and you can assign it as an agent or a view on, on things in Niagara. And this allows you a lot more power in what you're doing. It lets you build things that can be just displayed as a web widget in a PX view. And it's going to leverage all the improvements that Tritium does with each version. Like when we update all the core libraries, the required JS and the D3s and the whatever else is getting used, then you just get that benefit of Tritium helping maintain that infrastructure at the latest versions and the patches and things of that nature. Okay, very similar to what I was showing you with the Baja script. If I take a look at the help, also under that same doc developer and open web interfaces, there's a Baja UX topic here, and again, it has all the information about the different classes and stuff that you can use, things you can do, has tutorials like getting started, making your first Baja UX widget and everything. So it takes you through all that kind of stuff if you want to get into the Baja UX development side of things. And also in that same doc developer palette, you'll see, just like there were Baja script examples, there's Baja UX and Spandrel examples that you can drag into the station. And same kind of concept is that when you go to those, they have a bunch of JavaScript and everything, and it's showing you examples of how to work with Baja UX. You have that play button you can click and go through and see what the visualization looks like. So there's tools there to kind of help you work that out and play around with it. And just to give you an example of what I mean by all this is there's, where am my gauge example, right? So what this is a web widget, and it came out of the doc developer palette. So I just drug out this example linear gauge, and really what this is just a web widget, just like a web chart or a gauge widget, circular gauge or things, right? It's just a web widget, and it's telling it to go load some JavaScript code out of the module, right? And that's what's telling it how to render this widget. So that's what gets included into the module would be JavaScript, CSS, potentially HTML, that's going to render this web content. And if we take a look at the modules folder here, I can show you where you can go look at this. So if I look under modules, and not going to help me, so doc developer, right? If we look at the doc developer jar file and look under examples and Baja UX here, we'll see that what it's doing is it's telling it to go load this linear gauge JavaScript file. So this is the actual JavaScript that's making that gauge render as a widget inside the PX view. So you can package all your JavaScript and your CSS up inside the module and have it where somebody can just drag a web widget out and point to that JavaScript file, and that's what's going to render the content. So it's a little bit easier to support and maintain in the long run over just serving HTML straight out of the file space. It's something to kind of consider if you're really going to get deeper into this stuff. Now, there's lots of cool things that you'll find on the internet, right? And for example, I guess I should actually go here first, right? So windy.com is kind of a cool website, and it shows not just weather data, but wind data. Like, so sailors and people like to use this to see, what kind of winds are going to be forecast and things like that. And they have tools here, and they keep moving stuff around on their website, and I'm trying to remember where they've moved it to, but there's some tools where you can embed their widget inside of your own HTML page, right? And so what I did on the Niagara side of things then, and let me show you this other one too real fast. So Weather Widget IO is another example of a site. And so they have things like these forecast widgets, and you can customize like units and locations and all that kind of stuff, right? And you can say get code, and it basically copies the HTML to your clipboard so that you can go embed this into your own web page, right? So now there's obvious security concerns a little bit here, right? And I'm not necessarily endorsing and saying go, use these specifically, but it's easy to potentially embed web content from maybe an HTML occupancy sensor, like you got a Wi-Fi occupancy sensor that has an HTML view on it or something like that. It could be some kind of web server in the building, and you want to embed the content from that web server into your graphics, or it could be some external server like I'm showing you in this example. And let me collapse some of this stuff and get it out of the way here. So if I take a look at my HTML folder here, I've got an example of this windy.html here. So you'll see it's a really basic HTML file. This has a title and then I'm using an iframe, and I'm telling it to go load this URL, and I'm passing in the parameters for the latitude, longitude, and the units and stuff like that. And I'm just saying, go load this web page from this external server as an iframe in Niagara here. And I can do the same thing, for example, with that widget, weatherwidget.io. I have an HTML page here, and it's, it has a hyperlink to that web page, and then there's a script function which is telling it go load some JavaScript from this external server, and it's going to display that content, right? So we can see that in my browser here. I can see the individual pages being served up from the station, right? So this is just using the file or servlet, and I'm just telling it to load that HTML page. And I can see the same thing with Anaheim weather, like it's showing me this weather forecast widget that they have. We can embed all this into a PX view if we wanted to, right? So I've got an example of a PX view here, right? And so what I did in this case was I just set up a normal PX view, and what these are is web browser widgets, and I'm just telling it to go to the URL of that station to display the windy HTML file or the Anaheim weather file or whatever. And so this is HTML content then that is being rendered inside of a PX page as iframes, right? So again, I had to go set some things on my HTTP header providers to say, hey, it's okay to load this JavaScript from this website, or it's okay to load this CSS styling from this website, or something like that, okay? All right. The other thing we want to talk about here is APIs. And you've heard the term, probably from a lot of people already today, about open connectivity and using APIs to access data and things, right? So this is just, it's not an all-inclusive list, but these are probably some of the easier or more popular ways or APIs to get data in or out of Niagara. And I'll go show you some examples of these here as well. OBIX has been around for a long time. We have had that since the late R2, early AX days, but it does provide RESTful Web Services API to allow something external to query data from the station, histories, alarms, real-time point data. We have Niagara Analytics, which has a whole web API thing that you can drop in. It's a servlet, and there's support to allow external applications to obviously authenticate to the station, but then send HTTP requests and get information, real-time data, trend data, and things. That JSON schema component that I showed you earlier, I'll show you an example of that. It has actually an API to it as well. You just send an HTTP GET with that ORD, and it'll give you back the JSON payload off of the schema component. There's also things with the HTTP client driver. There's a string servlet that allows you to kind of not be a developer, but use some building blocks and create messages that would allow API integrations with the station. You could also, if you are a software developer, or there's people at Cochrane Supply, obviously, that are capable, that you might contract Cochrane Supply, that could build a custom servlet for you as well if you needed to do a custom API integration. And Kevin Mamachek will talk tomorrow and show you some more about Niagara Cloud Suite. I'm going to show you a couple things, so I'm going to steal some of his thunder probably, and show you a little bit, but who gets to go first, right? And show you a couple of these examples, okay? So we'll go through and try to show you some of this real quick and how it might get leveraged. So, all right, so in my station, I have an OBIX network in my station. So let me collapse some of this stuff here. Right. And so under my drivers, I have an OBIX network set up here. And when you look at the OBIX network and the server, there's a servlet, right, that's configurable. It's just /OBIX, right? So if I go to that URL in my station, I'll just go to the root of it, right? That shows me the root of the station, and then I can drill into things like get into the histories or get into the config space, and I can start navigating through services or drivers and things like that, right? And so this is just sending an HTTP GET message to the station's responding with XML, okay? So one example is like I might want to query the history, right? And it's just going to, that was the wrong one to click on. History query right there. It's just going to give me XML back with all of the date timestamps, right, as XML attributes or XML tags, right? So that's one way that you can kind of get API access to things in the station. There's also, like I mentioned, Niagara Analytics, and with Niagara Analytics, if you look in the analytics palette, there's a web API component here that you just drag into the service, right? And you configure what's the URL path of that servlet to the Niagara Analytics. And there's a whole doc that explains what's the format of the HTTP GET message or post message that you're going to send, and what do you need, what needs to be in that request. But you can request real-time data as well as historical data, and it's all based on the taxonomy, the ontology, your metadata, right? So I can say, go give me specific information from the station. As far as sort of examples of some of this stuff, this is just the Postman desktop application. If you're familiar with Postman, curl, there's different applications to send HTTP messages and things like that to a server and get information back, right? So in this case, I'm just showing sending the URL to the OBIX servlet to query the history. So when I send that request, I get back this XML in that client application, right? So I can use that to then create a chart or a table or something like that. The analytics APIs are HTTP posts. So in this case, I'm sending a post to /NA. Niagara Analytics is the URL for the servlet. And then I have to tell it what kind of request it is. So in the body of the HTTP message, you're telling it it's a request, and I want to say, give me all the children of this node in the station, and it'll give me back information about all the things that exist in the station. But there's value requests for analytics, so I can say, give me the value of this component in the station, and I want to know what the HS or H4 energy tag is, or the HS energy tag is. And so it's going to use the data model to go find that information and give me something back here, okay? So there are lots of different ways with in the JSON toolkit example was that JSON schema is just an HTTP GET, where the URL is going to be the whole path to that JSON schema component, and it's using the JSON exporter view on it, but it's going to give me back some JSON, right, which is JavaScript object notation, right? It's structured JavaScript with key value pairs and things like that, right? So again, this is data that can be digested real easily by something else, okay? So what's that something else, right, other than Postman, because Postman's like a testing tool, right? In this case, I have a Grafana server running locally on a Linux machine, a Linux VM on my machine here. And what Grafana is a dashboarding tool that allows you to, and they have all kinds of cool widgets and stuff like that. So I configured a connector from Grafana and told it how to authenticate to my Niagara station, right, because it has to authenticate. And then for each of these widgets here, you can configure how that, what that query does, right? So in this case, I'm using an Infinity data source here, which is just a standard data source that comes with Grafana, and then you can tell it, like, what kind of data are you gonna get back from your query? Is it gonna be JSON? Is it gonna be XML? And then you say, all right, what's my URL, my API URL that I wanna send the request to? And is it an HTTP GET or is it an HTTP post and that sort of thing? And then you can tell it how to parse that information. presentation. So that's the one thing I'd say is the biggest hurdle, is understanding how to parse the data that comes back in that response, right? Is telling it either a JSON path to extract the information, or this is an XML path saying, go get these elements out of the XML, and that's what narrows it down to give you the information that you want to display, and you can change the style of the widget and things like that. So this is just another example, but it's using the JSON schema component. So again, it's an HTTP GET, and I just have the URL to that JSON component, and then I have to tell it how to drill into the results there to get the information out of it, right? I can try to show you what I mean by that. Probably sounding a little bit abstract here, right? So let me just copy all of this text here. This was the response from this JSON query that I got from the station, right? And there's websites that let you kind of play with JSON or XML, right? So I'll just delete all this out of here and paste this in here. So there's help built into these types of things. Like you click on this and it'll tell you $ means the root of the object, and then you can reference arrays with the dots and square brackets, and you can do things to step through it. So the idea is, if I say $, right, that gives me this whole array over here. Try to get this thing scrolled up to the top really fast, right? That gives me the whole array. Now, if I want just the history results, because I don't want the key value pair that says station and current time and all that, then I would put .history results. And so that takes this JSON path and it applies it to the payload, and it gives me the filtered results out, right? And so then I can start stepping through that array. If I wanted to say, oh, just give me, element 2 out of that array, then it's going to get me down to that specific timestamp value pair or something that I want to look at, okay? So this is what I'm trying to explain to you, is that on the Grafana side of things, you have to tell Grafana how to parse the data that it gets back in the response, right? Whether it's XML or JSON or whatever, you're telling it how to go extract the bits and pieces that you need to be able to display the information here, right? So there's things that can display gauges and different types of bar charts and all that kind of stuff. And this happens to be, so Grafana, you can run it on the local on-premise, but there's also a cloud environment. And I won't steal much of Kevin's thunder here, but just to show you that, too late. So this is a Grafana instance that actually is running in the cloud. So it's hosted on Grafana.net, right? And these queries are using Niagara Cloud APIs. So instead of it being on-premise talking directly to the station is exporting data up to the Niagara Cloud, and there's APIs in the cloud that allow Grafana Cloud to talk to Niagara Cloud, query for the data, log in obviously, but query for the data, and then be able to display it in dashboards and things like that as well. So it depends on whether you're trying to keep everything on-premise or you're trying to do stuff that would be more at a higher level, at a cloud level, then these are all kind of things that you can do as well. So if you want to kind of up your game a little bit and do some cool stuff with your visualization, then learning more about JavaScript and HTML and how you can use some of these other libraries and do some kind of cool stuff with your graphics is sort of the next step on things. So, under the wire, 33 seconds to spare.
So anyway, we used to do a controls con of sorts for many a year, and we alternated every year with Tritium. They do the summit, and then we do essentially it used to be called the Eagle Summit. We do it up at a casino up in Michigan, and then it's evolved into controls con. So typically we alternate, but this year we're doing the bonus plan for Dallas. So anyways, the very first one we had a stuff to jump in. And we just get whoever was talking in the, hey, there we go. Whoever was talking in the technical track, we'd put them all up here and then open the floor to questions from you guys. And sometimes there was a lot of questions, sometimes there wasn't so many, and we'll see what we get. And if not, hey, I got more stuff I can show you there in terms of Tech XR. Yeah. So, all right. And without further ado, let's see if has anybody got any questions. And do we have runners? Joseph? Okay. And I think mics are coming up for that. Yep.
And we can try to repeat the question if we need to, but there's a question over here kind of in the front.
Yeah, not a question, I just had a remark. That JSON, and I didn't know what that acronym meant, but just as a remark, EasyIO actually uses that library, if you will, in some of their controllers for dashboard. It's kind of a, it's not an embedded web page, it's a dashboard.
Right.
EasyIO actually uses that. And, just for a layman who's not a developer, who's a HVAC guy, a control guy, writing that type of syntax, and the syntax has to be exactly right.
Oh, yeah.
Or it doesn't display.
Yep.
Is cumbersome and it's difficult. It's almost like you have to have it saved somewhere. How is that syntax exactly put? Okay, there it is.
It's usually, and I'll start it blabbing. It's usually some other service or something like that that's actually providing you that data in that format. So it's not so much you having to type it out as much as the service giving it to you in that format. There's that JSON toolkit that Tritium has, if I'm not mistaken, and you can play with that and take some data from your station and serve it up and check some different things out that way. We actually started with that too for Tech XR. Initially, the first few iterations of it, I just set up one of those and shoved some data out there and wrote the app on the HoloLens to grab that information.
The first time I'd ever seen it was EasyIO.
Yeah.
And the way it works in EasyIO, or the way we approached it in EasyIO, is you basically were writing the syntax from scratch.
Oh, okay. Yeah, generating the output.
So I've got it on the screen here, but if you go to json.org, it is a good place to learn information about JSON in general, and it's JavaScript object notation. So it's really just structured key value pairs, and you can see here that it shows like you start off with a root object, and then the root object can have curly braces and square braces, and generally it's going to be key value pairs are going to be encoded in the JSON. So JSON is just a structured way of encoding information that's easily human readable and also easily machine readable and parsable, okay? So a lot of it's going to exist of key value pairs, right? So I have the key that identifies the data and whatever that value is, and things can be stored in arrays, they can be square brackets, they can be curly brackets and things like that. So when I was showing some of that payload here, it's a key value pair of, or I guess I can show it back over here on the right here. It was probably easier to look at, right? So it's a key value pair. So you have your opening object array brace, like your curly brace, and then I have a key called station name and a value of HTML demo, then a key name current time, and so the key value pairs are separated by colons, and then you can have arrays that have square brackets and or curly brackets and things, right? So it's just a way to encode data in a structured way. But to Mike's point, it depends on the application as to what the exact syntax needs to be. But it's used a lot with MQTT, it's used a lot with HTML type stuff as well.
Tech XR.
Tech XR.
And if we get a little time too, if we switch the old HDMI cable, we included that in because it's basically just a servlet running off the Niagara station, and all that data is made discoverable by the HoloLens app. So it kind of goes through it first and says, okay, what's entirely available from it in a short and sweet? Here's all the devices, here's all some basic points. And then when you look at a particular QR code, it drills into that one and then gives you that full data from it. And I can show you later on. It's basically a IP address or host name / techxr / discovery. And then it'll bring up JSON for you. So when we get a half sec. All right. What else we got? Anything? And darn it, I had a good one that I was going to pose to us too. And of course it went right on my head.
You stumped yourself?
Yeah. So much for that idea. Maybe.
Got another one in the middle here, it looks like.
Yeah.
Or, sorry, there's one over here. We'll get you next. Go ahead.
What can you tell us about Niagara 5?
It doesn't exist yet. But it's coming.
We've been working on it for a while, I would say. The biggest evolution that Stephen mentioned is Java 8 has been a long-term support release for Java for many, many years, right? And there's lots of vendors that utilize Java 8 version. So that's going to go end of life in 2030. And so we're trying to be proactive and say the next long-term support release for Java is Java 21, which is out now. And so we're going to, the big thing is going to be to shift to that, but there's going to be other features and compelling reasons, hopefully, to move to Niagara 5 related to maybe device management with JS9s and other features and functions that'll get baked into the framework, but more to come, you know, so.
Did you scan that barcode that Stephen put up on being on the, yeah, so he's not here.
I grabbed that link too, so if I can do it, I'll work with Joseph and Alicia, and maybe we'll send it out to everybody if we can. Blast.
Kind of help steer on what, like I'm thinking better HTML widgets, right? More HTML components, since that's where things are at. Those are things that you guys can help prioritize in what we do, so. Especially with all the cloud stuff. Stuff's changing fast.
More to come. We're just letting the cat out of the bag and telling you next year we're expecting 2025 we're going to hopefully have a Niagara 5 ready to go, and we'll have more information along the way. So there was one.
Here we go.
I've got a stupid question. Why is PEM the only cert type that Niagara will accept? It's always a crazy struggle to get a PM file built correctly, and my IT director goes crazy every time.
That's a good question. It's definitely something we've picked on internally about our engineering department as well, about just natively supporting PKCS 12. We do support PKCS 7 and PEM formats, and I want to say I think you can import a PKCS 12 file, but maybe not. You may probably still have to convert it with OpenSSL or
14. You can double click it and it will open.
Oh, okay. So in 414, according to Kevin, like
we've got that certificate server or that certificate signing service in 414, right? So get on the beta and you can actually see it. But that was the other thing. I was like, oh, I don't have to convert the cert. I can just throw it in the Windows Store.
Yeah,
Cool.
struggling to get through OpenSSL every time I have to do
Yes.
that.
Yes. We hear you.
yeah, I mean it's a relatively basic command. You just do the PKCS 12 command, say export, and tell it the file going in and what you want the file out to be. But yeah, I get it. It's a pain. Like, and we're trying to get them to support more versions.
For Kev.
Oh, you can hear me?
On the lines of
You actually, I
414
heard you pretty good.
and certificates, it was mentioned earlier about the auto importing down from the server into the JSONs of the certificates. And I believe that it was the server that would act as the authority to actually sign the certificates. Would there be an option to use a different authority but still get the ability to auto renew like that?
With the initial release of 414, the answer is no. It's going to be the CA. Cert needs to be in the supervisor. We've been discussing some of that internally, and particularly with some customers that have requirements about where a CA certificate can be stored. They don't want it stored in the application. They want it stored, externally or on an HSM or something. So we've been having some conversations about that. It provides the plumbing that it's definitely possible that somebody could maybe write. So the way the certificate signing service works is there's a requester that says, hey, I need a certificate, and it tells the signing service that it needs a certificate. I feel like it's feasible technically that somebody could write something that says, go to this other URL to get the certificate and then pass it back down. But it would require some custom development. And
They designed it so that it's modular. So when you pick the signing service, you have to pick the Fox supervisor. So I think what you'll see is that they set it up thinking that somewhere down the line we'd have to connect to other things. But out the door, we just got to see if we can get this working, see how it works. You need to understand how that certificate works, how we have a special wizard that you can pop into the security dashboard to say, hey, I need 3 of these certificates for the Fox service, for the web service, and the MQTT. I don't need 3 individual ones, just give me one for this device. And it'll actually go and get that one certificate and install it in all 3 places. And then once you've approved it, you never have to do it again, right? Because now it just auto-renews.
Nice.
And then IT can help set up whether I want that a year from now or 90 days seems to be the staple for the web.
Boy, I was
but it
gonna
will
say-
auto-renew automatically.
Wow, because Tim Scott would really like that one too. You know it. And hey, I remembered, guys, what I was going to ask. In regard to templates too, and this was more so just, working with integrators, working with all the different customers and that. What's the biggest or some of the most coolest use of the templates that you've seen so far? Like who's really using them? If you can say that.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest implementations, typically, the gains are with device templates, generally speaking, but component templates, like I was showing with doing something like the tag dictionary service, and we've seen customers set up like fault detection templates. Like, so they want to be able to just go drop fault detection logic into lots of things in the station and not have to go, and edit everything in 1,000 places, right? And so that's the idea, and the benefit of it is that if I've dropped this fault detection logic in 100 things in the station and I need to change it, all I have to do is go change the template and then go tell it to upgrade the template everywhere that it's deployed, right? So it's a single point way to edit everything and then update it all. So it minimizes your engineering labor, cuts down on fat finger errors and things like that. So any sort of reusable sort of logic that gets replicated within the station, whether it's devices or some kind of control logic, are all good candidates for that type of stuff.
Super cool.
Yeah, a lot of the enterprises are doing it where, let's say I have a master systems integrator, they'll come up with the template that then they'll deploy on the devices.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the enterprises want it to look the same across the board.
You betcha. Yeah,
The template's really good for that.
Absolutely, and that's one of the, and I'll call out Mitch Conti, and we were doing some custom logic, exactly that, in some of the zone controllers that they had, and just pop it right in the points folder. It automatically links up all your points. Boom, they're off and running. Whew.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah. Okay, you guys, anything else out there? Yep, here we go. There's one.
That'd be a good question coming in here. You got a mic coming. Yeah. That way everybody can hear you a little bit easier.
Quick question, like for HTTPS or JSON libraries, do you have anything developed as examples for like openweathermap.org or any other thing where the wire sheet and the point conversions and all of the breakouts of how to extrapolate all the data from the strings for examples without having to recreate the wheel every time you do a new API?
Yeah, I've got a station I don't mind sharing that I used the HTTP client driver to interface with the APIs on openweathermap.org. And obviously you get, depending on the API you want to use, there's like forecast and current conditions and things like that. But you get back a big JSON payload. And the easiest way to kind of dissect a lot of that is actually with, in the JSON toolkit palette, there's demux components, and so you can link your payload in and it automatically will just break all the key value pairs apart into individual properties, and that's an easy way to kind of extract. And there's also like JSON path components where you can go say, oh, I just want to extract this specific bit of information out of that payload, but the toolkit has a lot of things built into it to help allow that. There's still a little conversion possibly, how's time encoded or things like that.
Yeah, by the way, our weather service now does HTTPS, which was lacking. So there were a lot of places that couldn't actually hit the weather service, the National Weather Service. So that's in place. And then in 4.14, they are HTMLizing it so that you can actually configure it and update it and look at it in the browser as well. So Yeah, I'm kind of, my a little hobby of mine is weather. So I have a weather station, Netamo. So I have essentially the Jace communicating with the JSON toolkit to their cloud and pulls back the data back into the Jace so that I can use it to correct the National Weather Service for my house area. So there's all kinds of cool things that you can do with that.
Yeah, just in certain sources of data types, and I found some with weather and a few other open APIs where you do the demux and it'll extrapolate and give you the breakdown of all the lines, the slots, but the format of the data is in these obscure, or at least not used here in the U.S. Formats, and you got to, there's not a simple palette to convert those, and then you got to do a half page or a handwritten wire sheet just to get them into a usable piece of information someone could understand.
Yeah, we used to have a lot of services in the U.S., and then all the big companies realized that what is the one application that you guys don't turn off on your phones? Is weather.
With location services enabled, so they know where you are.
So IBM bought them up. So you had, Apple bought them up. Everybody bought a weather company as quickly as they could just for location. So
it's probably a
Weather Underground
object.
was bought up, right?
Yeah.
And then they shut down the APIs. So
it's probably going to be a program object to parse. Like if it's some kind of weird encoding in the JSON, you're probably going to end up running that into like a program object or a component you develop that's going to help do whatever that conversion is. If it's not just like a mathematical conversion, like a lot of times they'll give you the seconds since the epoch or the milliseconds since, and those are relatively simple math conversions, and you can link it into like a BABS time slot and it'll just convert it. But if it's some other kind of crazy encoding of the information, then it might require like a program object or something like that potentially. So. Got some other questions. Kyle, you going to talk loud?
I just want to know, since we're on the weather service, why we can get current data. This has always been a problem. But you can't get today's,
historical.
It's just the National Weather Service. So when you look at the
weekly forecast, you can't get the current data. It's always stale.
Right.
And then you come back 10 minutes later, and it's current. And it's stale for 4 hours.
I'd have to start this other station up, but
I feel your frustration. So I actually use Niagara Analytics. So when I show you my graph that he stole tomorrow, you're going to see some dotted lines. And I was tired of when the weather service goes stale, I get a 0. So I've actually told the engineers, hey, could we do a bigger time window? So the analytics just says, oh, if it drops to nothing, to go ahead and take the points in between, right, and connect the dots so that I don't see that. But our office was shut down. We spammed. When we we got like 2,000 Jaces on the wall to run through tests, and they all started hitting the weather service, and our IP address gets shut down every once in a while. But
you should use a Fox weather provider in that case. So like if you have your supervisor station checking weather, then the Jaces can all talk to the supervisor and use a Fox weather provider. So it just asks the supervisor for the weather data. So it's only one station hitting the National Weather Service in that case. And so one of the things that we've done to sort of help address that a little bit is being able to configure that sort of stale behavior, right? So when you look at any of these components from that weather service, right, you'll see that there's a last update here which says, when did the station last request the information and get a response from NWS, okay? And then there's an observed. Well, what observed is the timestamp from the weather data that National Weather Service sends to the station. So this is saying, hey, the station requested the information at 5 o'clock. The last update NWS did was 3:53 p.m. Eastern time. So it's been a while. And in some cases, it might be 7 hours or 10 hours. Like you just see NWS is not publishing any fresh data through their API on that.
It went stale.
It went stale.
How do we fix it?
So we've added And I got to remember if it's on the weather service or if it's on the provider. I think it's on the provider. Maybe there's, where is it? There's a stale threshold now that we've added, and it's under the NWS weather provider. So before, we hard coded it at 3 hours, and we felt like, hey, if the data is more than 3 hours old, then we're going to mark it as being stale. But now you can go in and change that. I think that was a 413 change.
414?
Is it 414? Okay. That added that configurable property now. So you'll be able to say, I don't care if it's 12 hours old, I don't want it to show stale, just show it like it is. But it's an issue with NWS on them updating their API data.
Another question I had was, and this is unrelated, it's about like old browser views where you had embedded web pages and now it asks like you have to add it to a whitelist. Where's that whitelist? Where do we make that change? If you want to. So there's reasons for it.
So the whitelist only applies to the Workbench client. So loading a browser page inside the Workbench client, right? So if I went to, HTTPS, weather.com or something, right? Then it's going to tell me it's not allowed. Okay, but I can go to Tritium.com because we added that into the whitelist automatically, right? So I can load a web page. So all this is protecting the Workbench client from loading some nefarious web page is all you're doing. So that's under your defaults here and your system.properties file. In the system.properties file, there's you can just search on whitelist, and so there's some options here, and you can see, like in this case, I uncommented. This normally has a comment line in front of it, and by default it includes Niagara Community and Niagara Cloud, Honeywell.
Can you zoom in? Yeah, they can't see that. Can you zoom in? You have your little zoomy thing?
Yeah. I forget how you even bring that one up, but they can probably see it.
This is another one of those where we're secure by default, so we only put in the URLs that we know that you'll hit.
So I've added a bunch of URLs here that would allow me to go to those inside of the Workbench client. It doesn't affect the browser. If somebody's connected to the station, they click a hyperlink, it takes them to some other site, it's going to load. This is only protection in the Workbench to say, we're saying these are the safe websites to go load in the browser inside of Workbench. But you can do it with a regex. There's an option here that explains like doing regex patterns to whitelist like websites and stuff like that too that you want to allow in the Workbench.
I only asked because somebody asked me again recently.
Yeah.
It was asked a year ago, it was asked a year before that, like maybe 2 weeks ago somebody asked, so.
Right.
Now you know.
I never had an answer, so.
Now you do.
Now I do.
Funny how that works.
Knowing is half the battle. That's what they always said on G.I. Joe.
I just like to know who to call. I call James.
There you go.
Right.
When you're using HTML and JavaScript to create your own widgets that you can later use as PX includes, do y'all have examples on how to utilize relativize ORDs?
So some of what I was trying to show in the previous session was using the velocity documents in the context, because that is sort of the hard thing about using, if you're going to write raw HTML that you serve from the file space, you've got all these absolute ORDs that are pointing to specific things in the station, right? So to make it relative, you can use the variables from the PX, the velocity context as variables, and I showed a couple examples there, like with that AHU HTML file, it would work on all these different devices with having a single HTML file. Beyond that, then you get into the Baja UX, where you're creating something that's going to be a web widget that's embedded in a PX view, and it has a binding, right? And so I can bind that to something, and the thing that the view's on becomes that base thing that gets resolved, right? So, but if it's just raw HTML, it's going to be absolute URLs or absolute ORDs, essentially, that you're going to be mapping without using velocity context or Baja UX.
Are there velocity examples in Doc Developer?
Not in doc developer, but there is a velocity. If you search on Apache velocity, there are some examples in the help, like syntax and stuff that you would use.
So you showed reading data, but you could also set points, write data back to the
Yeah, so
server.
Apache Velocity is going to allow you to use the variables that map to data in the station, but then I'm going to leverage Baja Script to actually do things like really I did show an example of using Velocity to get values. If you really want to write things, you're going to get into the Baja Script.
Okay.
So if you look at the Apache Velocity, it'll show you examples here, and there's a more detailed Apache Velocity topic, and this will actually get into all the different syntaxes and stuff. So there's different examples or information here that talks about like how do I use these functions that are built into Niagara to call the different things, like to get the display name or to get the value from it or to resolve an ORD or things like that. So there's a lot of sort of examples that are built in here to the help itself.
Can you embed velocity pages in the PX?
Yeah, there's a lot of cool flexibility that you can do with Velocity. There's also there's a Velocity PX topic too that it gets into and talking about. But yeah, there's actually some ability that you can use the PX editor and you can embed VTL syntax into the PX file itself. Now that starts getting kind of wonky complicated because then the PX editor doesn't really know how to render it. So you get into, like, you could build your PX and then you're going to go edit the XML, like just use the XML view and you can put the VTL syntax into it. So there's some pretty powerful things you can do with that, actually directly embedded into a PX file in addition to doing it with the HTML files as well. But it's all covered in the help. Just start digging into the Apache Velocity topics in the Workbench help.
Yeah. Oh, and you can also, and if you got any other questions like that too, besides James, Kevin, et cetera, you can hit our support page, support.cochranetechservices.com, I believe. And we've got a couple developers on staff, 3, and they can usually help with that kind of stuff too.
We're trying to build more dynamic pages. It's just the PX functionality is kind of limiting. And so we're trying to build more dynamic pages. We're just kind of experimenting and exploring.
Cool. Yep. Yeah, we wound up making a little Baja Script application. Remember Autobox? Yeah, so we did that, and I think Ford was using it for a while, and et cetera. And same kind of thing. It was early in Niagara 4, and we just wanted to have more responsive design and that kind of stuff, so we just kicked that out there for a while. Yeah, I know. Some people really liked it. I did too. But and we've good developers are now. Aaron Rickel, James was calling out, and he's really good.
Yeah.
Ed, Thomas now too. Thomas
yeah.
Gann. So we got a lot of really good guys. So they can usually help you out.
This is regarding templating. So what are the limits to editing in the Excel sheets when you're working on templating? And the reason we ask is permissions, right? So they're very tedious, right? And just curious if you can actually edit those and what the limitations are in that case.
Oh, can you assign permissions and things?
Yes.
There's not anything that I can think of off the top of my head that would assign permissions to components from within the template itself or I guess if, good question. The component within the template has a category assignment. You could, I suppose, assign it to a category inside the template itself so when it's deployed, but the process doesn't give you a way to change the category assignment. If you've got a lot of things that needed to be done like that, it'd probably be, the most efficient way would probably be some Java code like the robot editor or a program object that would just query and iterate through the station and based on what you're finding, assign things to different categories would probably be the most efficient way to do something like that.
Okay. 2-step.
Yeah.
Which works.
Yeah, sometimes it's the best way is to do a little bit of code like that. I know it's kind of daunting maybe if you're not familiar with Java code, but feel free to post. You could hit these guys up and we could probably give you an example that would get you pointed in the direction that you could just edit and run with. So
for sure.
Sounds good. Appreciate it.
Cool. That's kind of what I was aiming at too, is like, what's the highest number, I don't know how to word this, what's the biggest Excel spreadsheet you've seen used with templates? Like how many elements?
How many lines? Yeah, I thought that's what he was asking to start with.
Oh, yeah.
And I was trying to think, how many lines can you have in it? And it's not like a CSV file, I think. There's a pretty massive number of possible rows.
But what have you actually seen, like, help people with? Because I know Bruce is using about, good 5,500.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You can also actually, I didn't show you guys,
I name dropped you, Mitch, too, earlier.
You can select multiple templates and do the export config, and you end up with a spreadsheet that has a tab for each template. So like if you were trying to do a whole job, you might have a VAV template, a fan box template, an air handler template, whatever, and it could all be in the same spreadsheet. But you can do it, but it might make sense to have them broken apart so you can deploy them.
And Bruce was doing that. I think we noticed too that they deployed in order.
The tabs.
And there was some things that required these objects to exist before you could make the links out of this one. And that worked.
Yeah, if I wanted to deploy a VAV and I wanted to be able to relate it to the air handler needs to be deployed first, right? So I would need the air handler tab first and get all my air handlers in, and then I could deploy my VAVs and be able to relate to the air handlers that then existed in the station. So.
Bingo.
I'm going to ask that question. We'll go ask engineering what they do in the test lab. They have that all automated, so I'm sure they've got something.
Thousands and thousands. Billions and billions.
Yeah. Hey, if you're ever up in Richmond, ask for a tour of the system testing lab. It's actually pretty interesting to go in there and see just the amount of JACEs and Niagara devices that are all powered up and talking to each other, and they've got all kinds of equipment that's monitoring things like MSTP waveforms and testing packets and all kinds of things. That just is this whole ongoing thing. And as Kevin was saying, there's a lot of automation and scripts that go into updating. Because there's thousands of stations and things that are being tested, so they have scripts to update the software and to do some of the testing processes.
And that's how I got my question from engineering. What did you do in analytics that crashed all of our devices? And I'm like, I have a pull rate of 1 second, and they had that on the supervisor, and they pushed it down to every one of those, and 1 second pulls on all of those. That was not a good thing. I learned what scaling was.
Mitch.
So with the explosion of the IoT out in the marketplace, right? Is there any thought to adding a port selection function to the TCP driver?
A port selection?
Yeah, so like in the backnet, you can select what onboard port of a supervisor you want to direct the traffic to. Is there been any thought to adding that to the Modbus TCP driver? Suggestion, I guess.
Can you not just put the port into the connection?
No, let's say I have 2 NIC cards on a server.
Oh, I understand your question now. Okay.
Sorry, so I should have more guys.
Yeah.
2 NIC cards to a server, spanning a couple VLANs, gets my end devices. It'll go out, it'll hit both NIC cards, but then I time out and I have down devices, right? So there's a fix that we use, but I was just curious if there'd be a better port selection.
So most drivers will bind, IP drivers in Niagara will bind to all available network adapters.
Correct.
But I would expect it to know the IP address of the Modbus device you're trying to talk to and know which adapter has the route to it, and it should try to connect on the adapter that has the route to that. But you're right, LAN IP and BACnet IP, SC, Ethernet, you specify the adapter that you want to use for the driver, but things like OPC and Modbus and Niagara Network and all that kind of stuff, those they bind automatically to all available network adapters.
Interestingly enough, the Niagara Network in that instance doesn't have issue. The TCP network, unless we had static routes, it doesn't struggle, it just takes a little bit of time, then we have down devices that aren't really down.
Specifically the Modbus TCP. It might be something we need to look into then. And it might be like it would be open a case then, because that sort of sounds but it sounds like a bug,
Was that the thing we were working with Kevin? The other Kevin Crable, with the adding the routes? Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I know with BackNet SC, they're starting, you can do routes, it remembers where it goes and how it gets there. Our system database, since we're now reaching down into all the devices, we actually remember how the route comes. So if you have a Jace connected to two soups, it will know that there's two distinct connections when it actually gets the database set up. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I'd suggest opening a case about it and let's dig into it a little bit deeper. So
We got a live set we can look at.
Yeah.
Cool.
I have a question. Are there any tools that we can use to get PCAP files out of Jaces instead of having to go?
Yeah, 100%. Take a look in the Doc BackNet guide, and there's, where is it? Or no, is it in Doc BackNet? Is it, where is this at? Now I got my brain thinking where the heck where it's talked about at. I thought it was in Doc BackNet. Troubleshooting, Internet Works. I'll find it.
You have 3 minutes and 24 seconds to solve this question.
Yeah, so if you take a look in the palette here, there's a BackNet util palette, and I'm just trying to find the help on it. But inside of that, there's this thing called a wiretap. And so you can add a wiretap to the BackNet MSTP port in the Jace, and then you plug in the IP address of your machine that's running Wireshark, and it will forward the BackNet traffic to Wireshark, and you can do a PCAP. Now, it's not going to get you all of the low-level MSTP handling because it's getting passed through essentially like BackNet IP to do that. So if you really need all like the token passing stuff, you're still into going and plugging something into the serial port and doing the capture that way.
Because you have to leave a laptop now. That's something.
Right. Yeah, if you need the actual token passing stuff, you're still into it. But if you're just trying to get the BackNet messaging and everything to look at the requests and responses and all that kind of stuff, you can use the forwarding Wireshark capture.
Cool.
And I think Optigo, it's Optigo, right? Yep. They've got a pretty good blog and article about using that and then using their visual BackNet tool as well. I don't know if you use Optigo or are familiar with that.
That's for me to look at Wireshark. So.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else? Yep. Hi-yo.
Are you guys going to do containers or Docker on your 9000?
So it's on the roadmap, I would say. Is one of the things that we're looking at is the ability for, and I say it's on the roadmap, we're working with a company right now, and they're creating an application that'll run in a container. And the intention would be to have some kind of a container app store, right, that Tritium's vetted these applications that people want to run on the 9000 in a container, and then they can sell those applications and you could purchase them. So it might be a VPN or it might be, whatever, something else that you want to run in a container on the 9000. And so that is something that we're working on allowing for sure. I think there's potentially, initially we thought about actually using a container to run Niagara on the 9000, and we ended up falling back and doing the same design that we've done historically, but that may kind of come back around. Part of the things that they're talking about with Niagara 5 is better device provisioning capabilities, like being able to more easily update all your Jaces to the same version and things like that, and it may come back around to being that we want to run it as a container. I don't know, that's just me speculating, but we are working on allowing people to run third-party containers on the 9000 to add other functionality to the 9000.
Yeah, what was it you want to run?
Node-RED.
Node-RED? Okay. Yep, good thing is it's a Linux-based operating system, so.
Yes.
So.
Lots of forward thinking there.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. We're actually 8 seconds over, but that's okay if there's any other questions.
Before all the business people come back in.
Yeah, all those. They don't know what they're talking about anyways. Okay, so I guess we'll wrap it up with that one. Yeah, feel free to hit any of us up with any further questions afterwards. And I just want to say thanks for coming, and thanks for attending this one. And thanks to James. Thanks to Kevin.
That's yours, Sue.